Welcome to the Cleveland Heights City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. It is May 11th at 5 p.m. I guess I'll call the roll. Tony Good is here. Why don't we just go around and say your names?
Gail Larson here.
Craig Cobb here.
Jim Posh here.
Sarah Stone here. Jessica Cohen here.
All right, and I understand Joe DeWitt Floyd is on his way. Does anybody know? Okay. Oh, please, on his way. So this is the first meeting where we're meeting a committee of the whole, and we're all here. I'll try to be here, and we're meeting. This is something we decided to do based on a consensus that was formed during our workshops. So I'm just going to turn over the first part of the meeting to Vice President Larson, which is Municipal Services and Environmental Sustainability Committee.
Thank you, President Kudo.
Sure.
Having a little bit of problem with my script here, so can you just bear with me a minute? Sorry. We have as guests this evening, Public Works Director Colette Klingscale, Assistant Director of Housing Alan Butler, and Assistant Director for Planning and Development Brian Iorio. And I've asked them here for the two topics what I would like to have input from them on. The first is the bulk refuse pickup. And Director Klingscale, will you please update us on the bulk pickup program? How is it going this year? Any future needs that you feel are necessary to keep the program going?
Certainly. So we just acquired our second claw truck on April the 20th.
Yay.
So we really needed that, especially to have as a backup when that initial truck is down, because it would throw us off on bulk week. We would run behind if that truck went down. So now we have 2 claw trucks, and we're on the schedule where we pick up in each neighborhood a certain week of the month. That's been going okay. Some residents get a little confused with what their week is. It's in the calendar and it's on the website. So say for instance, if you're in the first full week of the month, you'll always know that your bulk is gonna get picked up like the gold week. Okay, it never changes. So there's a map that shows what area of the city each color represents, which is also on the website. And your bulk week coincides with that color on the map. And as I said, it's going okay. Some folks still get a little confused about what their bulk week is. I can tell you, as being the director for the last 5 years, bulk is much better than it used to be. Bulk used to really, really be a problem when we would pick up folks that were being evicted or move outs. We don't do that anymore. We'd have out-of-town landlords that would just evict folks and they'd leave a lot of trash on a tree lawn, take up a lot of resources. Since we've implemented the new schedule and the new rules, we don't have that problem like we used to have.
How did that change? What changed that people become aware that
We did an educational campaign letting folks know that we were no longer going to pick up that bulk. It really kind of hit the fan during COVID when we started to realize that it was just out of control, and we had a lot of repeat offenders. So it'd be the same landlord that lived out of town. Whenever they evicted someone, you'll see the whole lawn full of furniture, garbage. I have so many photos in my phone, and it would just really tap our resources. We would have to hold folks over overtime because we get a lot of complaints in the neighborhood, and so we stopped doing that. So now, if a landlord has a move out, or if someone in the home is moving out, they have to get a dumpster because we hold to the 4 items. So you put out 4 items a month on your bulk week, and it has gotten better.
Tires?
Tires, they just pick up tires. You know, we have a foreman that goes through the city and they pick up tires, and then the solid waste district, they collect tires from us a couple times a year.
I've had a question before. We have the calendar, which makes a lot of sense to me. The calendar advises us to put our fall pickup out on the tree lawn at the beginning of the week. So I'm thinking, like in my neighborhood, we don't get our garbage picked up till Thursday. So sometimes it seems like people put their bulk pickup out on Thursday and the truck may have been through already. So I see that as something that's happening in my neighborhood. Maybe if we just emphasize the fact that that truck can come anytime during the week.
And we do that, but now that we have a second bulk truck, the first bulk truck that peruses the neighborhood, then it'll go through the neighborhood twice. Okay, but we would prefer, so that we don't miss it, that it goes out that Sunday night.
Okay.
And we start that Sunday because it might be a lot of bulk on Monday and it may not be a lot of bulk on Monday. So they'll move to the next day that's scheduled that week.
Okay.
And it's more likely to happen on those folks that may have garbage pickup on like a Thursday and Friday.
Yeah.
Not so much earlier in the week.
I'll try to educate my neighbors. Jessica.
Well,
Councilor Cohen. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And that's actually a good segue because with the 2 trucks now, so now there's going to be 2 trucks each week doing the bulk
We'll
pickup.
have 2 trucks available each week to do bulk pickup.
And then interesting about the 4, and this is like I have to be honest, my husband keeps track of this for us, so he knows when to put it out. But the 4 items, what happens when the bulk truck comes and somebody has, let's say, 5 or 6 items? They're on the right week and it's the right neighborhood. So then
If it's 5 items, more than likely they're going to pick it up.
okay.
When it gets to be excessive, 6, 7, 8 items, then no, they're going to bypass it. But you can still call in and request a special pickup.
That's what I was saying.
You can request a special pickup during your regular bulk week if you have excessive items, or you can call and you can get a special pickup at any time. It doesn't have to be your bulk week, but you have to pay for it.
How much
But
is
you can
that?
get it's $10 per item.
Per item.
Mm-hmm.
And then is there that's calling the Mayor's Action Center, you can do that, or emailing the Mayor's Action Center, or is there, they should call Public Works?
They can call. It's on the website. They can contact our utilities department because they're the ones that make the arrangement, or they can contact the Mayor's Action Center.
Thank you.
President Kuda.
I was trying to get your peripheral vision before.
I don't have any.
I'll explain it. What happens with, I don't know what to call it, nuisance type situations where, for instance, on the corner of Williams and Noble, somebody just put a mattress like almost on the intersection, and it was just sitting there for a week. I don't think anybody, my wife actually ended up using the app, but I don't think anybody knew who put it there. So how is that handled?
If it's in the intersection or in the right of way, then we just have to go get it.
So we report.
You report it to the Mayor's Action Center, you call a dispatcher, and we have to go get it if we don't know where it came from, if it's in the middle of the street or on a corner or something.
And, okay, that's good to know. Just because I think, sometimes people just see some rogue kind of thing, not somebody moving out that should have done the protocol. And then I was going to ask you, on the $10 per item, can you then exceed 4 items if you pay for them?
Yes, but it still can be a move out. We're not going to come and collect a house full of furniture on a special pickup. No, but it can exceed 4 items. It'll be up to 10, 11, 12 items.
Okay,
But we're not going to come in and do a clean out or eviction.
I understand.
And every now and then we do have those, and we will coordinate with housing. And those homeowners will be cited, and we'll go pick it up, and then they're charged a fee that's like 3 times the amount it would have cost under normal circumstances.
And then my last question, may I?
Sure.
Looking ahead to the budget, the next budget, bulk pickup, staffing, equipment, anything that you would say might be needed in addition to what we have now?
No, not at this time. that extra truck really has made a difference for us.
Just on the first truck, how many years do you think we have left on that one?
I can't say right offhand. I would have to check.
I mean, that might be just for long-term planning. And do these trucks last 10 years, longer?
I'd have to get back. I don't want to say.
Okay.
Could I piggyback on that? Mayor, I know that one of the things you wanted to do was a 5-year capital budget. Where are we? I mean, I'm not, believe me, I know you're not prepared in this moment.
Right.
But that question that Councilwoman Cohen asked really kind of gets to.
Yeah, that's absolutely part of that conversation. The staff is working on a 5-year capital plan. They're prioritizing starting on the budget for next year. But in addition to that, as they find time, they're going to be working on the capital plan. I don't have a timeline for that. But that's absolutely the sort of thing that would be included in there.
Got it. Okay.
Any other questions? All right, gonna move on to the next item.
Sure.
I'm just gonna give a quick history on the discussion that we had last year and then, because that's where I'm looking for the update from both of you. And Brian Iorio, the sidewalk repair program that we talked about, we were gonna look at cited properties that were because of a sided panel was damaged because of a tree that was on city's tree lawn. And I know you had set aside some money in your 2026 budget, so I'm just kind of following up to see any discussion that you may have had, where that plan sits, if there's been changes to it, or if I should be looking at 2027 budget.
Well, we are actually working with Housing and Planning and Development on a program where we're using some funding. I think it's ARPA funding. We're using some ARPA funding, and they can tell you more about it. And we're trying to pilot that program so it kind of coincides with our paving program, where we're trying to look at sidewalks on streets that we're currently paving. It's actually being coordinated through the housing department with that funding. As far as funding from the Department of Public Works, I think to move forward on a plan like that, we're looking at 2027. That's not something we're able to do this year. And because we have that funding available, this is a good time for us to pilot something like that to see how it works. And then they can tell you more on how they're administering the program.
So as you all know, $2.5 million was approved by council out of the ARPA funding in a variety of ways, either through revenue replacement, direct allocation. We call it bucket one, if you remember. Part of that was for driveway, sidewalk, and apron repair.
Under the umbrella of exterior repairs.
Right, correct. For this type of work, we categorize as bucket one, and we issued an RFP in late 24. So we had 2 responses. We've gone under contract with one of them. We're looking to go under contract. Let me back up. The other contractor pulled out, so those funds we were planning on allocating to the original, the only other contractor. What that program started off as, and the reason why HBO was involved in this is because it's a homeowner grant program. So we were going and individually qualifying individual homes. Most of them, I think, might have received a citation at some point, or they just heard about the program. I want to say at some point in the last couple months, we cut that off because we started to realize we're running out of time. So we need to find a way to expend these funds so that we're in compliance with ARPA, the Treasury, and the intention of the City Council. So we're moving from a homeowner grant program to where we're picking several streets where we're going to replace blocks as we identify bad blocks and individual sidewalk blocks, and replacing those until we run out of funds, basically.
And how do you identify the particular blocks that you're going to replace?
Yeah, so we have we've collaborated with Colette to get her, street resurfacing map going on. And then we overlaid the ARPA eligible areas that we had as well. So we've identified the streets in those overlays. And what we're gonna do is just walk the neighborhood and mark out the bad blocks and then discuss that, with the contractor. And then he'll come through and do the replacements of the ones we've marked. So yeah, again, it's a way we have to spend the money. We've allocated it to as a bucket one, and we've offered it for individuals who qualify for the income eligible applicants. And now we're going to move to that second phase of it where we're addressing streets. And we thought it best used to to coordinate with another program and do the streets and sidewalks at the same time.
So a resident on the second phase would be living on a street where you have sidewalk panels that are trip hazards. And so the contractor's gonna go down and repair
Right.
regardless of the cost.
Yeah, an inspector will identify, we'll mark them out, and then we'll have that conversation and review with the contractor to see any orange blocks that are marked. We'll do a count, we'll add it to a list for them, and then they'll go down. Right now, we're identifying Creighton as a street that's on the resurface list. Altamont is going to have a resurface and a water line replacement. And there are a couple others, I think Whitethorn, Ivydale. So we'll start with the two streets, and then we'll see how far, how many blocks we get. Right? There's a limited amount of funds, so we'll mark those out, and then we'll keep track of it as we move forward to see, where the funding runs out.
That sounds great. When you have a panel that's been damaged because of a city-owned tree on the tree lawn, will you call in forestry to get some pruning done on the roots?
Yeah, well, through this process, the contractor will put it to him to say if there's an issue with the city tree, right? We've got him, Andre on speed dial, and he's been great helping us out, giving advice, right? And the tree lawn trees have sort of been an issue from a long time, right? So we've come up with other plans in the past, whether we allow asphalt or we meander around the tree. There's been a lot of different discussion over the years on how to handle this. And we want to keep the healthy large trees, and that's a policy we're gonna keep. And if we can help out people, right? So again, this is one of the initial times we've done this sidewalk program. Looking forward, I think we can take some information from this initial layout and figure out what works best and how we get additional funding, how that works in the future.
That will be coordinating with Public Works, I assume, so that when we look at future budgets, we have it based on the data that you've already collected.
Yeah, again, if it's subcontracted or if it's in-house,
Right.
if it's an individual applicant, or we decide we want to do complete streets. I think that all those questions are up in the air. And what are the parameters for the program? Is it going to be city owned, only related to city trees and sidewalk issues, or so those are all questions I think that'll probably come up and have come up in this initial run, and give us some information to use.
Thank you. I would hope you can update us, like at a regular council meeting on the program, and maybe in a couple months include that or include it in the ARPA reporting, however. Councilor Stone.
Just a couple questions. So do you feel like it's hard to match the funding to the project? Do you feel like you'll be limited to working on the streets that are being paved? Primarily, you'll exhaust the budget on those areas?
I would think that, yeah, we probably could, right, with the money we have. And there are, I believe, 5, 2 of them are fairly long streets, so we'll start there, and then, for, doing a sidewalk block count in our head, right, just to figure out where it is, but then we'll have to associate with that with the square foot cost and come up with it, but
Okay.
But yeah, I think we'll definitely spend it. I don't know how far it'll go, but I think that's what I can report back to you, how far, and if we can get more than the 2 streets in.
Okay, so for those areas that are not income eligible, I'm just kind of curious about the process here. A couple of years ago, I think the city went through, at least in our neighborhood, and cited a number of us, including me, said you have got a paver you got to deal with, within a certain amount of time, and a lot of people did, some people didn't.
Right.
So what's the process when you have a really bad paver and it's clearly been cited, it's been marked up? What are the actions the city takes if it's just not repaired?
Other than the program?
Yeah.
I would say.
So
Yeah,
you're-
so we would send a violation notice. Again, you've all been part of that lovely sidewalk or a systematic process. You get the violation notice and you have so much time to comply with it. We come back out and verify it, and then follow-ups to see if it's done. All of our violation notices have information to our grant programs, so you can reach out and see if there's a program available for you. The typical funding that we've had in the past has not allowed us to do much work on the sidewalks or yard area, other than if it had to be 50-50 on the house and yard. So with the ARPA, right, we've expanded that to some yard programs, some sidewalk programs. So that's where we would identify people who couldn't afford to do it or didn't do it on their own for whatever reason, and see what kind of help we could offer them.
Councilor Pasha, do you have a question?
No.
Okay. President Kudo.
Thank you. So part of my question is for the chair and part of it is for the assistant director. So the way this is being done, this pilot program, it's an economy of scale kind of thing. We're right. I mean, we're getting a little better bang for our buck because we're working on streets where the paving is already being done.
Right. And we've put it out to bid on a larger economies of scale project.
So my question is this how you envisioned the program being part of, if you were to get your ideal program in 2027, is this what you envision, that it would be connected to street paving projects?
I think that makes the most sense, because if we did designate a bucket of money, to use the ARPA terminology, a bucket of money for 2027, then that could be part of our guidance in terms of looking at repairing sidewalks. Maybe we have to have Director Butler going down the street by street and walking and seeing which ones have the highest majority of broken panels, or some other criterion to use. But I think that this idea of using this particular funding source right now gets us to some answers to questions that we've had. Director Klingscale and I have talked about this for a long time.
Sure.
And it's been in Transportation Mobility Committee for a long time, and it's a beginning of understanding what the contractor needs to have from us, what the contractor's cost per panel, those kinds of things. So I think it's a great start, and it will give us a great basis for making decisions in the future.
Evidently, I prompted something here.
Well, Councilor
Oh, sorry.
Cohen has
Unless you want to
a question.
follow up on that.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Just follow up.
No, and I was thinking along the same lines, but slightly differently in that, this works for now because we have money that has to get spent within a certain time period. So it makes sense to maximize, economies of scale. But looking forward, if we have this information and we want to explore the idea of some sort of city sidewalk repair shared cost, because we know one of the frustrations is that concrete, I had it in 2 different houses in Cleveland Heights. The concrete people don't want to come out for these small jobs. It's nearly impossible to get them. So this will help. But I would definitely like to see it focused on the more economically depressed census tracts first.
That's what they're doing.
Right. And I just think going forward, I think that might also be another way, not necessarily tying it with street repair, because street repair could be anywhere, but looking where we have, the most amount of issues with the most amount of need. And I think that could be really impactful.
Big uplift.
Yes. Yeah. And I just, the other thing I want to say is what I'm hearing, and I feel like what bulk repair, and when we bought the 2 new snowplows, like we're just keep catching up on things, right? Like years of not having the structural framework and the capacity that we need to take care of the city. So I feel like this sidewalk is just yet another example of that.
Councilor Pash?
So I have a little different take, but somewhat similar. You know, we have these systematic inspections, so we have a database or some information if at some address in Demington where I live, I mean, if there's 2 panels that during a systematic inspection that need to be repaired, you know, you mark that, you know after the inspection if the work has actually been done or not, but then the following spring, you basically put all those out to bid for the city to get redone. And then we have a contractor that does it, and then we assess the homeowner for the costs for those. I mean, there's kind of an economy of scale that, I mean, I wouldn't look at the, I wouldn't look at this as being a shared cost. I mean, our cost is the work that it takes to coordinate all this. But I don't think at that point we should be paying to have someone fix their sidewalks. If we can find out where it's done and they can benefit from economies of scale, and then we just do a special assessment against them like you would if a tree goes in.
If I may, just a couple of things.
I've got my seatbelt on.
Firstly, just so we're clear, the contractor that's doing the repaving is not the contractor that's doing the sidewalks.
Right.
So they bid that separately.
Right.
And one of the things that we did look at, we did research what they were doing in some other communities. And they were doing it pretty much like you just kind of laid out. If someone got a citation, those communities, and this is what we kind of tossed around internally, those communities would give them, they get a citation, they get an amount of time to make the repair, say 30 days. If the repair wasn't done in 30 days, the city would have already bid with the contractor to say up to a couple $100,000. I think that's where we got the $200,000 for. And say that, well, if you haven't fixed it in 30 days, we're going to repair it and then we're going to bill you for it. Then they give you 30 days to pay the bill, and then if the bill isn't paid, then that's when they assess it to the property taxes. As a nuisance, yeah, like a nuisance. And those were some of the programs that are going on in some of the surrounding communities where people were cited and may not have moved to get the repair, and the city repaired it and say, okay, now this is what, based on economy of scales, whatever the city bid out, this is the price that we got per block.
I kind of eliminated the part about collecting a payment because it seems like that's going to be additional work on the city's behalf.
It would be additional work on the city's behalf, but when you talk about assessing, it just whether or not the city wants to pay me now or pay me later, because with the special assessments, you're going to get paid twice a year. If you bill somebody in 30 days, who knows, you might get paid sooner. So that's the difference.
Councilor DeWitt Foy?
Do we have an idea of, say, the average price for a homeowner bidding out a small project versus what we think we'll be able to bid out on like a street length project on like a per square basis?
Yeah, it's definitely higher.
Yeah, I think it would be difficult to know from this exercise because we started off as a
Dollar amount.
No, we started off as a homeowner grant. So I think when they were bidding on the RFP, they were thinking of individual jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we were to bid it out the way Public Works does all their projects, regular capital project, I think we'd get a lot better competitive.
Right. Because I think even if we take one step towards what you were saying and, you know, bid it out at a larger scale, it still is a lot easier for the homeowner to not have to deal with the individual for the contractors, and then they're still going to get a better rate. So if a city is citing them and saying this needs to be fixed, and then the city is getting the bulk rate and doing the bid, managing the bid, I still think that's a huge improvement over our current process where we just turn it over to the homeowner and, you know, tell them good luck.
I'm about to move on, but I would like to make a comment, then I'll let you both say something. I'll let you both. I will comment. we have details to work out for future programs, and this, tonight we can't do it, but the programs that Director Klingscale and I have looked at that we shared, the Lyndhurst programs, the Shaker Heights programs, all are based on funding a lot of money at the beginning of the year, and then the administration works on going out for bid and determining which streets will be covered, et cetera. So those programs can be really used as models for us. So this evening, I wanted to know where we were at on this particular project. And I thank you for getting that started and for identifying that this is an issue for walkability for the city and safety. So it crosses over into public safety and health as well. Councillor Stone, real quick.
Yep, just want to endorse the suggestion that you have, and Director Klingsdale, it would also provide a window for homeowners to apply for a grant when they're assessed and receive a bill. There'd be a breathing time there. So just a thought.
Councillor Cohen.
I think it's great. I think we should seriously consider what we might need to launch this for 2027.
So Director Klingscale, how would you see us working towards that conversation to talk about 2027 budget possibly?
Well, I think the pilot will give us an opportunity to really see how things work. Because whereas I said all we needed was a truck with bulk pickup, the capacity, I would like to see what how it affects capacity in our forestry department. Because in areas where it's a tree problem, the forestry department still has to come out, trim, do we have the staffing to cover that? This pilot would let us see how that goes and how the overall program goes, and how to administer the program. I think it'll give an opportunity to do that.
When do you, we know we have to spend all that money by December 31st, so do you see that, because the weather has to be good for this as well.
Right.
Do you see that being completed by September perhaps?
I'm hopeful. So the contractor that we have for this is a fairly big outfit. So that's good because they could get a lot done very quickly, but also that means this is kind of small potatoes for them, this project. So we want to make sure we're high on their list for their schedule this summer.
You're building a
The
relationship.
goal is something, yeah, right.
Okay, so I'll probably look at September, having you come back and.
Yeah,
that
I would
make
say
sense?
when you're exploring funding sources, if we're talking about low mod areas and we're doing whole streets or whole, not sidewalk blocks, but blocks, neighborhood blocks, that would be eligible for CDBG. If we're doing individual houses, then that would, because it's not considered housing.
Yeah.
So it's just some technicality of the grant. So when we would have to find, if we wanted to do individual houses, like a grant because of the tree situation, or they can't afford to do it on their own, we would have to explore non-HUD funding.
The two could be coordinated though, right? We could look at both the sources of funding, possibly.
Right, I mean, with general fund, the sky's the limit. I'm a grant person.
No, there's a
so-
limit.
Everybody's back on.
It's lower than the sky.
All right, I'm gonna move.
Compared to the grants, it's
I just have one more quick question, and that would be if any of my committee members have any idea about what they'd like to see us discussing at this committee going forward this year.
Leaf pickup, and I know that we've been working, and the administration has been great about investigating the possibility of a trackless leaf loader as an alternative. And so my last I heard is that we're still working with the company to get a demo, and then we'd have to understand in June or July how that demo, like, do we like it? Are we interested in it? And then if we do like it, we'd have to think about that budget-wise, how many would we need to really make a difference for leaf pickup? So that, and I think snow, we moved in the right direction, but we should probably just touch on that in the fall, make sure we're ready to go. Those are my two.
I would just endorse that and say also just commend the Public Works Department for the work we're seeing on the streets with, a more than doubled budget, and why not keep going? There's so much to catch up on. If there's a funding priority, it would be continuing to deal with our streets.
Could I ask quickly how our leaf vac was doing? I know it was under the weather for a while.
It was back out for spring loose leaf collection.
Okay, and no problems?
No problem with spring collection.
Yeah, just following up on Councillor Stone's comment about the streets, it'd be maybe we should have a check-in at some point about where we are on the potholes. You know, just are we the street resurface? Once we've had a few months to get everything done as much as possible, it'd be good to know, like, are we looking at a lot of resurfacing? Do we need a lot of resurfacing? I think this question of like catching up and getting to a steady state where we're just doing regular maintenance as opposed to.
We're gonna have Director Klingscale in a departmental report during a regular council meeting when she's available to do that. And in a couple months, that program, we should have some good data from that anyway.
Thinking ahead to the 5-year plan, it would be great to see scenarios of different funding levels of the street program and what it would do in terms of the outstanding priorities. I mean, this doubling of funding, I don't have a sense of where the administration is, if this is going to be planned to be a continuing thing every year. If so, what's the impact? What would it take for us to catch up? I don't think I have a clear picture of that. I think that would be helpful. We have different opportunities to think about multiple year funding plans.
And with everything that's on the list for the administration this year, I'm still gonna continue to research sidewalk plowing, snow plowing, and maybe get through this winter and collect the data and see how many days we didn't have access to our sidewalks as a means of asking for a budget item, some equipment.
Vice President?
Counselor Posh.
So real quick, I mean, does the city have sort of a list of streets and priority of those streets that can be shared with council? Not anything that you would have to develop, but something that you already have in inventory. You know, there was some LiDAR work that was done at one point. We know that the list, if you have one, you're able to provide it. I think the given is that it's contingent on additional work, because I know you shuffle things around, you don't,
Right.
as you mentioned correctly, I mean, you don't want to put a whole new street in and then have to dig a trench down the center of it. But it'd be real helpful, I think, to get a sense of really what our inventory of our streets that really need this kind of replacement. But again, you got a lot of things on your, this is like your Christmas, it's your busy time.
Public Works is thinking of.
Around.
It depends on what
I would not want you to have to react to my request unless you actually physically have something already to share.
Mayor Petrus.
Thank you. If I could, on the topic of roads, so you can pretty easily get a good estimate for how much you should be investing in your roads. So if you know the number of miles of roads that you have, the cost per mile, and the estimated life for a road, you can come up with roughly how much you should be putting in. So we have about 300 lane miles of roads in Cleveland Heights. 1 mile of road costs between $300,000 and $400,000 to resurface, and it lasts on average 20 years. So that means that we should be spending about $5 million. And so my intention is to, again, ask council for $5 million next year. And we see that residents are thanking us with so many, I'm sure that council's receiving them as well, for the serious investment that we're making. With regard to snow removal from the sidewalks, my view is that at this time, we just don't have the capacity to do it. It's a very nice service that University Heights offers. University Heights is less than 1/3 our size, and creating that program, I think, would be very difficult. Maybe the director feels otherwise, but as she mentioned, if it's not street resurfacing season, then we're working on leaves. So if we're not working on leaves, then we're working on snow removal, and coming up with a whole new service would be a very serious undertaking that I'm not sure that we realistically have the capacity for.
Thank you. I appreciate that your information on that. So I will not be bringing that up this year. Anything else?
But I'm sorry, if I could, if there were certain select areas, so for example, around Noble Elementary or something like that, if there were something very specific and something that we could take on, we're open to having those conversations. But some large sidewalk program, I don't think we'd be able to do.
In my brain, it's around those critical buildings where we have children and people walking on the streets because it's not safe on the sidewalks.
Yeah, we'd have to talk about how we could move around equipment because
Exactly.
you might have a piece of equipment at the community center, but if we're talking about getting it to Oxford Elementary, it can't just ride all the way there. Someone would have to drive it over. We'd have to talk through the operations for that.
Park a Bobcat in my garage. Thank you. All right, my committee report and my committee meeting is done. So we'll move on to, thank you so much for coming tonight. I appreciate it.
We will put that as part of the committee responsibility,
Thank you.
that whoever is talking
gotta
gets
say?
to turn it over to the next person.
First,
Really
Just let everybody
Yeah, I mean, this is-
shuffle.
you could have phoned it in.
I'm participating.
All right, well, the Housing and Building Committee is up next. We are here to introduce Director Zamp, who is going to be discussing the RFP for the upcoming Housing and Building Code study. I sent some draft material around to you this week, so I can let you present and then bring us forward with questions.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thanks for this opportunity. If you remember at the last meeting, we spoke about what our strategy and our approach was going to be to improving inspections, code enforcement, and permitting process. There's a lot of steps to that. But one of the most important steps, in fact, maybe the most important step from our point of view, is making sure that our codes are saying the right things, because they're a hodgepodge. We've learned this from the zoning code, that over time, things have changed and they don't always talk to each other. And we also realize that there are best practices out there that our codes don't reflect. And so what we said we were going to do at the last meeting is put together an RFP and then really share that scope of work with you. The hope is that we can walk out of tonight's meeting with an agreement on what that scope should be, because we really want to get this out on the street this week. It's going to take time for people to respond to it, and then we're going to have to bring it before council, and then it's going to take time for people to get up to speed. I think we put 9 months in here, but we know that these are really important things that we want to take care of. So the sooner we can bring somebody on board, the better it can be for everybody involved. Property owners, landlords, people who are complaining about the property, people who are trying to improve the property. And so we drafted the RFP. We had a lot of really good input, not only from the staff, but from the mayor's office as well. And then I know there's a couple of comments that the chair is going to be prior to this meeting. So what I'd like to do is really focus in on the two sections that have the most meat to them, because the rest of this is really the boilerplate stuff that we have in our RFPs. And that would be first the project intent and major components of the update, which is in section 1. And then we'll go through the scope of work. And I'll run through this first part somewhat quickly. And make a statement that RFPs often can be too general, but on the other hand, sometimes they can be too specific. And what we try to do here is hit a balance, because when you are too specific, when you have a laundry list of things that you're trying to accomplish, often what happens is you hire somebody and they accomplish those things and nothing else. What we really want here is somebody to come in and take a look at our codes holistically. But that doesn't mean that there aren't certain things that we're really interested in. And so we tried to list those in that first section here. And I think one of the things that we're going to have to do to clarify in this section and the rest of the RFP that the chair brought up, but I'll say up front, is so the building code is the umbrella code that takes care of the building services, inspectional services, business licensing, and even the facade ordinance. That's all under the building code. So when we talk about the building code in here, it doesn't just mean Eric's department, it means Alan's as well. Now, I think we want to revisit that because it's confusing to all of you, it's confusing to us, and it's confusing, I think, to the property owner. So that's one thing we want to add here. But that being said, so we want just a general review of the building code, the code cleanup, compare it against the state and federal laws, of course, and consistency against other codes that we have in the city. That's a real problem that often happens with codified ordinances, is that they live in their own silo, but there are things that happen in other parts of the codified ordinances that need to be looked at. The zoning code, for example. Compare neighboring municipalities' codes and industry best practices. And here specifically, we also want them to look at the International Property Maintenance Code, which is not, we have not adopted that, and that would be something that would really help the inspectional services side, but also parts of the International Business Code. And Eric can speak a little bit more to this, but the Ohio Building Code, which we've adopted, does not integrate everything that the International Business Code provides. Do you want to just speak about that for a second?
Thank you for allowing me to speak and explain what's going on exactly on the Ohio Building Code and International Building Codes. International code is called ICC, which is all around the 50 states within the United States. State of Ohio has its own organization. It's called Board of Building Standards. This organization issues our certifications, like our building department is a state certified building department, including the building, electrical, mechanical, and plumbing inspectors. It's separate from the housing inspector who are not state certified. So the state of Ohio adopted the ICC books, International Code Council books from the United States, and adopted to the Ohio. So their chapters has been removed or modified at the best of their knowledge to make sure it meets the Ohio requirements. There are a few things which I was speaking with Eric here these past weeks regarding it should be back into from the International Code to the Ohio Code, which when I spoke with Columbus, Ohio, they said that's a great idea. However, you can adopt those codes from International Code to local municipality codes. A few of them, which don't have that many actually. And they suggested me to go to that route. And I will suggest those few codes to be implemented into our codified city of Cleveland Heights ordinances.
So that's a preview on that one. Just to give you a taste. The next one is to evaluate the effectiveness and sustainability, not in terms of resilience and sustainability, but its ability to continue of interior point of sale inspections. Alan, do you want to just speak to that one and why we were specific about interior?
Yeah, I think we've had some debates over the past years whether or not there's a need or a right to go inside of every property, especially when it's up for sale. There's typically in a regular arm's length transaction, you'll have a private inspection done. If an owner refuses, we'll have to get a search warrant to go through right of entry kind of things. So we want to just evaluate this from a holistic viewpoint and see what other communities are doing and where the trends are to see if this is something that still wants to continue, that we require an interior inspection as well on a point of sale.
I was surprised to see this, but and I also thought it was for a different reason. So I'm surprised to hear that. I think there's been a lot of debate generally about whether point of sale inspections add meaningfully to the process, regardless of entry, considerations. And I guess my question is here, I want to make sure that it's not just an up-down evaluation, but if we are to keep a point of sale process, how might we improve it? Because I've also heard some questions around the escrow requirement versus not having an escrow requirement. People really like having a point of sale inspection as a sense of what, when you're a buyer, you have a sense from the seller of what might be needed, and it becomes a negotiation tool, but that escrow piece has been questioned for some time. So I just want to throw it out there that I want to make sure that we're getting like a full evaluation.
Yeah, we can add that in. What we don't want this to become is and it would become a sort of public debate about point of sale, which is a topic for another time.
Excuse me, sorry. The question I have about the interior, I understand the difficulty of getting access. I do. But what about these apartment buildings that we're currently working on that are so outdated and unsafe for people to live in? I would think when there's a point of sale on those that when you look at your considerations, that you consider that we aren't just all single family dwellings, that there are multifamily dwellings that are currently not acceptable and need to be modified and fixed. And so to me, point of sale in those circumstances, and even a single family LLC owned. Yeah, so I'm hoping that
No,
you look at those.
that's why we added some language in there for this. Again, we could have an hour long debate,
Understood.
but I think it should be reviewed and expanding it to not just the interior, but the whole process. I think that's a good idea as well. So that's
President Kudo, and then we
good
should
feedback.
allow Eric to continue.
Sure,
Yeah.
I have two questions. On the point of sale, and this is only just for context. I'm assuming that it's better just now having it in-house. And we're no longer farming it out. I mean, that's turned out to be better, yes?
Of course. Yeah.
Okay, and secondly, do we have people on staff now that are certified in electrical and plumbing and can do? Because I think that was the initial problem with, not so much with point of sale in the sense that they could only go so far. So we're staffed properly for
Yeah,
that.
so we don't use any type of outsourcing for building or housing, other than for backup positions currently. So building department's all city employees, and same with the housing department.
I'm glad to hear that. Last question, did the Novak report in any way inform our approach to this?
It does, and it's one of those foundational documents that we've included in here as something that whoever we select should review themselves also with.
Glad to hear that as well.
Let's let Director Zamp get through this first section summary, and then we'll come back to questions for it, so we don't.
Review approval processes, that's more on sort of the building side, but also inspections to make sure that they're predictable and consistent. And we added in here something specific about fences, which we can spend a lot of time talking about, but long story short is right now we leave it up to the property owner to confirm or verify that the fence is being built on their property. And that's become problematic. I think it's probably the number one complaint we get.
Yes.
And it's a really hard thing for our inspectors to verify because you need a survey. So we want somebody to come along and give us some good advice on that one, because we could know it's contentious. We also know it's expensive to, let's say, get a survey. So we want to be able to balance that. Of course, everything should be looked at through an equity and inclusion lens, and cost and income is an important part of that equity. Recommend changes that would encourage property owners to adopt sustainable practices while preserving the community's historic character. So that's I think uniquely Cleveland Heights thing. And then, of course, making it user-friendly, which it's currently not. What's missing from this list, but the chair had suggested that we add very specifically, is ways to, I'll put it this way, ways to focus in on the problem properties more so than the minor infractions. So whether you're saying that's an absentee landlord or a vacant property, how do we make sure that the code can strengthen our ability to focus in on that?
Just to add to that, I think in this list should be really a discussion of enforcement in general and the enforcement process from beginning to end. How we think about the problems in enforcement in the execution of relating to the properties you mentioned, all the way through there, the way that these issues then come to court, and whether the court has sufficient penalties and tools to be able to be effective in dealing with really problematic properties. I think every city council member could say what lights up our email right now is that those properties that are vacant, that are dealt with by absentee landlords, that are really degrading our housing stock. And this RFP mentions that as a priority. So I think it should really be a specific direction to think about. Other comments on this section?
How much will be done to align whatever it is we do with the state code? Because I know, like, there are states where you can make it mandatory that there's rental property like the one Vice President Larson was talking about, the landlord pays your hotel bills. You know, we don't have that here. I don't think we have the ability to do that. I wish, maybe home rule, but I mean, I think that's part of what somebody needs to dive into.
Absolutely, yeah. We want to make sure at a minimum that whatever the state's allowing us to do, we can do. And so that's one of the first bullets.
The RFP really emphasizes the working on the code, dealing with issues within the statutes themselves, but at the end of the day, what are might be one or two big problems that the public would experience that would be that would come from this study? What do you think would come out of the codification of the code? Anything that the public would see?
I think what's going to come out of it is a code that we can enforce.
Okay, that's a good answer.
But it will also be much clearer for people to understand what they need to do for their properties.
Thank you.
So hopefully, if we're successful, that's what we're going to accomplish.
Yes.
Will this get into our permitting or our processes?
Yes.
Okay, so like the bottom point, recommended changes that would encourage property owners to adopt sustainable practices, something along the lines of how do we permit or allow solar panels as an example? Do we have a lengthy, extensive, difficult process for a homeowner, or do we have a quick, process that supports homeowners that, moving in that direction? And I take that with everything.
Yeah. That's what we had in mind with that bullet
Great.
point, because there is like a model solar ordinance that's the CFO has developed.
Okay.
Which is part of actually something we should add to the list of things for them to review.
Okay, great, thanks.
I would also just like to endorse, you mentioned this is an optional project at the end, and it relates to your goal of making this code and the processes accessible and easy to manage. The idea of taking a look at the citizen online portal, whether there are alternatives to that would be beneficial for us to know about. I think that's a great idea.
Speaking of CitizenServe, we are in the process of, within 2 more weeks, we're in the process of updating our online portal to modify to make it more user friendly. And actually, I want to say thanks to Alan because he was a spearhead on the CitizenServe, and compared to any other software I've met in the previous municipality I used to work, CitizenServe is the most user friendly one, and it has much more possibility and ability to do even more.
More that you have than less.
So now I'd like to skip ahead to the scope of work and just walk you through that. And again, here this is a suggested scope of work, but we're certainly open to if there's a really thoughtful consultant that wants to propose something different, we allow that. Task 1, project initiation, project management. So that's typical. We kick it off with the consultant and sort of lay out the project and the responsibilities, but there's also this ongoing coordination. And I know the mayor had brought up a point. So the idea is that we're meeting on a regular basis, bi-weekly, let's say. If things start to go the wrong direction, we have the ability to pull them in the right direction as opposed to it waiting too long. Task 2 is a really big part, which is the background review, data collection, and analysis. So that's where they review the existing materials. They do a real audit of the building code, meaning all parts of the building code. And that's where those very specific things, we want them to look at it globally, but also those very specific things. And we'll revise this to reflect the conversation we had earlier. And then subtask 2-3, review inspections and permitting processes and procedures, as we mentioned. And so out of that will be a deliverable, a memorandum. And we include those types of deliverables because they're easy things to have meetings on and to review. So at that point, okay, this is consultants' take on sort of what our issues are. Then we go into starting to think about things creatively with best practices and model codes. So that's where they'll have their experience, look at the International Property Maintenance Code, International Building Code, and also our neighbors' codes, and come up with some suggestions there. Again, memorandum on best practices model codes, that's task 3. task 4, which is one I think we'll probably spend a few minutes on here, is stakeholder and public engagement. I want to skip that for a second if it's okay and come back to it because that's the one that I think you guys want to spend some time on. Task 5 is the preparation and adoption of the amendments. And we've built in here that and this is the model we've used with the zoning code. So there will be an administrative draft first, which comes to the staff and the mayor. We take a look at it, we provide comments, and we have a meeting with the consultant to go over all of that. Then once that's been satisfied, then there becomes a public review draft. And so that one will be presented at a public forum, council, a committee meeting, or a committee of the whole meeting, whatever this format's going to be at the time. We'll post those on the website and have a time-limited public comment. And then we, the staff, will compile the comments, provide them to the consultant to make changes, and then there's the final version of it, which then goes into the last subtask, which is the adoption process. And we're gonna take the lead on that because we're gonna have to be the ones who live with this code. But we still want the consultant to at least come to one meeting and present and do the redlining and sort of what the finalization work. So that's the end result of it. There's the optional task that was mentioned, which is the digital tools. So we're asking them, and this was based on a comment that Councilwoman Cohen had at the last meeting, if we could, since we're already bringing on somebody, if they had the ability to help us utilize CitizenServe or other tools to inform and make it just an easier process for our residents and property owners. So that's the optional task. So now going back to public engagement, and I mentioned this in an email to the chair, but it's really a global comment, is that projects and consultants' budgets can always get out of whack when it comes to meetings and engagement. And so what we try to do here is have something that does have a significant amount of engagement because it's really important in Cleveland Heights. But based, I think, upon some of the comments that council made, acknowledges that maybe council may take on the weight of some of that engagement itself. And so we can talk about what that looks like. But I think one of the things that is going to be successful in the zoning code update, and we've built into here, is that early on, we're asking the consultant team to come and meet with you as council or committee of the whole committee to talk about what that engagement is going to look like. So they understand what they have to do, we understand what the expectations are, and you understand expectations. So that's going to be an early meeting. Then there are the actual activities themselves. And one of the things that we suggested in here is a technical advisory group. It's a technique that we've used with a different name in the transportation plans, which we call the TAG there. We're using this tag on our housing needs assessment and our zoning code update. And it's a way to bring in stakeholders and residents, but a limited amount to help guide primarily the engagement process, but also to give some lay people ownership of it so that, and this actually happened in our zoning code update, and I'll give Lou credit. We were sitting around the table, us planners talking all these technical terms, and he said, hey, wait a second, what does this term mean? And we said, see, that's exactly why we wanted somebody who's not an expert. Because too often, those of us who deal with this every day, we know what we're talking about, but the average person doesn't. And so a big part of the TAG group would be people to translate sort of the technical jargon into layperson speak.
Can you just elaborate on that a little bit, how you would appoint that group? Who do you choose? How does the appointment work?
Yeah, so it's an informal group that's really informing the project. So I would call it like a staff level or administration level group. It's not a committee.
Not a commission, okay.
And generally we identify types of people that we would like to have and then start to reach out to the people that we know and ask for suggestions. So we're always open to people who we think would make sense that we may not know. But there is a limit, you want to keep it to 10 to 15 people, just because we start to get too many cooks in the kitchen.
Do you envision having council representation on that group?
Typically we don't, but I would not be against it. I think we're trying to build in a lot of engagement with council and sometimes having council members sitting in an advisory group can prevent that group from speaking more openly. But I wouldn't be against it if council so desires.
On the engagement, are there particular issues that you think council would be especially suited to explore in this public engagement, or if you are asking us to lead different aspects of this that come to mind, or do you want to wait for you to decide what that might be?
I think we know what some of those hot topic issues are going to be, but we wouldn't want to just limit what they are. So yeah, I think we want to give the consultants the ability to identify what we would call hot topics, and then that's where we can coalesce around, okay, could council hold this, committee hold this session on, I'll use a bad example, commercial parking in residential neighborhoods, right? We already went through that process. And I think it was this committee that did that. So that would be an example of where there might need to be a dedicated public session on a particular topic. And certainly if you guys are going out into the community, like I think we're planning on doing, that's also an opportunity where I call that.
That's what I was
engagement.
thinking of as while we're planning this.
Yeah, but having a sort of a roster or a list of all the different events surrounding this initiative would be really important, because you could say to somebody, hey, on this date we're talking about commercial parking. You may not be interested in that, so don't come to that one, but come to this one over here on point of sale.
Questions, comments?
Yeah, I guess just to clarify, when says that council is considering assuming some of the engagement responsibilities, you mean like a public hearing? What is that, like, we're not going to be designing that and implementing that. Well, I guess what are you hoping that we will do or not do on that?
I think it's sort of, as mentioned before, is that if there are these items that need extra attention through extra meetings, that council could convene, or at least the committee could convene those listening sessions, public meetings, whatever we want to call them. Because what we don't want to do, we want the consultant to be able to focus in and give us their technical expertise, but we don't necessarily need them to show up to 50 meetings. We can take the notes and share that information with them so that they can make the appropriate recommendations.
And just on that topic, I think actually something that we could use for this and the planning is a lot of times I feel the question, they'll email us all these wonderful suggestions or complaints about the code or something like that, and we would forward them to staff, but perhaps we need like a dedicated, I know we have the planning at clevelandheights.gov, but perhaps we need some sort of dedicated mailbox for these particular code update processes, or if it's planning, to have that everywhere as a place where, and we should just email them, because I think that what you were saying about us getting a lot of opinions, and we want to make sure that gets funneled into the consultants, right? And not just ends with us.
Yeah, and for example, with the zoning code update right now, when we get a comment from a resident going through council, we're just saying that right off to our consultant, because at this point, we want them to evaluate it. And so I think that's a great idea. For whatever reason, the planning act doesn't resonate with people necessarily, because I think in multiple meetings I've said, please send your comments to this, and they still go to you guys, but that's also, I guess, sort of natural.
Or a web form, I mean, I know we're redesigning.
But I think
website,
we're open to whatever way to get the information to the consultant, because ultimately they're gonna help us, interpret that's what I'm looking for. Interpret it, yes, and determine how to respond.
What do you need from council tonight? Do you need approval? Do you?
Not necessarily approval, but I think,
just
this
feedback?
Yeah, this feedback has been great, and again, we're gonna try to get this out before the end of the week, so there's always an opportunity after an RFP goes out in the selection process to change the scope, so I think still keep your thinking caps on and feel free to share it with us if you have any further ideas of things you'd like to see. And certainly that meeting that we have with the consultant early on, is gonna be the time. There might be something that none of us have thought about. You could bring to that meeting and say, we want you to look at this.
Just one last thing, because we've talked a lot about how we're having these simultaneous processes with the zoning code and the housing and building code. I don't remember seeing anything, I mean, I know the zoning code is mentioned in here, but are we going to be including in the scope of work, if it's not the same consultant, that they are working together at a certain point in these two processes to understand how each work stream is moving and what might be needed?
It goes without saying, but I don't think it's a bad idea to include something very discreet in here that says that.
Yeah, because it might be, it's time, right? If it's a different consultant, we will want them to consult with the other. Thank you.
Anything further, Director Sam? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Chief Britton to come join us at the table. So this is the second part of the building and Housing Building Committee agenda. As you know, we are considering a legislation for short-term rentals, and among the driving forces behind the desire to have this legislation is issues that maybe the city is facing with law enforcement issues that affect our neighborhoods. And I thought, who better to ask than our chief of police about what we're experiencing right now with those short-term rentals and advice you have, particularly about the nuisance provisions we want to include in this legislation.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you for inviting me. Good evening, everybody. So I was listening to Director Zamp on the way in and talking about responsible property owners and being good neighbors. The challenges recently, just talking to Lieutenant on the way in, these short-term rentals have become a problem, meaning, I know in short-term rentals, the property owners are supposed to be reliable, check in on and verify who's renting the property. We've seen an uptick, graduation season's coming up, having house parties. When we respond to a house complaint or a noise complaint, determining who's responsible for the property at that time. And we will find, upon response to the location, no one has taken responsibility of the property at that time. So that hinders our abilities to find someone responsible and hold them accountable. And something similar, Director Butler and I have worked closely over the years, even on my previous appointments as captain and lieutenant, but under the nuisance. So it'd be nice to have some legislation, maybe to coordinate with nuisance abatement, not to punish homeowners that are doing the right thing, but make sure we all know what they're doing and that they're being responsible, even in terms of out of state property owners that really don't know what's going on in their properties. And something we can have legislation to enforce, something similar to nuisance abatement, saying, hey, we've been to this property 3 times in a month or 3 times this year. We need to do something to mitigate this. Like with occupancy permits, property owners are required to submit and file occupancy permits and people that are living in the home. So something similar to that, not to create more work for, housing, but something similar that we could utilize to say, hey, we have direct access to that property owner and say, hey, this is what's going on here. We need to get this resolved and taken care of.
I think that's part of our the intent of this legislation is that the majority of these properties are doing good work and they're maintaining, they're peaceful and helpful members of the community, and there are a small majority that small number that this legislation can address and also help protect the neighborhood. We do have it written into the draft the idea of a responsible person. We also have the assistance of Airbnb to identify the property owners and the guests and assist us with enforcement for those repeat offenders. So those are some of the ideas that are going forward. But I wanted to have the chief come just to see if you all had questions about the experience here or any ideas that you would want to be sure would be included in the legislation with respect to this enforcement.
Well, I would agree with the chief just because I've gotten a significant amount of complaints over the 4 years I've been on council. As far as no one being responsible, there has been legislation proposed at the state level that you can't be anonymous. An LLC cannot be anonymous, and it gets very specific about you gotta have an email address, a working phone number. You have to be able to be contacted. That has not gone through. Now, what I don't know is and I wish the law director was here, is if this is something we can do on the local level under home rule, because that is a problem. It is a problem statewide, and I don't know why they didn't pass it, because there. I wish the law director was here, like I rubbed my magic lamp. The other thing is, there is no law saying how many properties a property manager can take on. And I will tell you that that is also a problem. I know I'm describing the water, we're drowning in, but I mean, it's good to I think, just to get this out in the open. You could have 3,000 clients, and then the chances if one of them is a short-term rental, oh yeah, I'm gonna, go do this one, the pipe might be bursting in this building and so forth. So that's what we're up against. So that finding that person. So, law director, I was gonna ask you, I know that there was legislation proposed at the state level that property owners had to have a working phone and an address and email where they can be contacted. Because right now they don't. As
For LLC owned
LLCs, I'm talking about LLCs. Is that something we can do I mean, I know you might not know this right now, but is that something you could look into? Can we pass a law about the information property owners of Cleveland Heights properties would have to be able to have contact information?
I'm not sure if I follow the question completely, but our certificate of occupancy and rental registration requirements do prescribe information that's required of each applicant or registrant in order to receive that certificate.
Well, if that's true,
it is true.
Okay, but the chief was just talking about these, when they try to contact the people, there's no way to get a hold of them.
Okay.
So I'm just trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, no, I mean, we can certainly look into that, and I can follow up with the chief about the specifics of those situations and report back.
Yeah, and I think, so I had looked pretty closely at the draft legislation and sent back some red lines. And one of the big questions that I will want to raise when we're up to that is who is actually responsible for the registration, because we have a couple different defined terms, like an owner, an operator, and then there's a third one, responsible party.
Right.
And so I think that this feedback is really helpful as we consider who is the person responsible for each piece of, there's a registration piece, there's, maybe they need to have a person, I think we wrote this in, but I can't remember, like a point of contact, for the actual property itself that's may not be the person that registered the property, if that's the property owner. So I just think we need to take this into account and also look at the registration requirement. I know there was some sort of requirement about putting something in the rental itself. Who is that contact? So I just want to thank you, because it'll go to how we look at the language.
I know that you mentioned the nuisance provisions, and I wonder if in your experience I know that sometimes it's hard to tell if it's an Airbnb or just a neighborhood disturbance, but things you would want to be sure we write in that are just chronic issues that come up besides, is it occupancy, parking, noise, trash, all the above?
Yeah.
What yes?
Yes, ma'am. I just, thinking back, there's house on Taylor, I think there was a house on Maple, I can over when I say street off of I may be wrong, like Blanchard, Berkeley, Bainbridge, there's a report of that they have repeated car violations parked all over the place. But yeah, something like I mentioned with Director Butler, we have direct access to the person responsible for that property at the time. Because the last thing, I just want to emphasize, I don't remember the city, I'm having a lapse in memory right now, but we see on the news all too often about house parties, and they get short-term rentals. And the fatal one not too long ago, I don't know, does everybody recall that one I'm talking about? And that's the last thing we want, here or anywhere, but like I said, something to tighten up legislation and rules where, if they're not following those rules and guidelines, we have the capability to revoke, something similar to an occupancy permit.
Right, great, thank you.
I would like to support what President Kuda is talking about, Director Hannah, because I have a property next to me that the owner is a name. And when you look at the state registry, that's all you have. So there are instances where necessarily a particular property manager is the only contact available. And I'm wondering if it would be a way to enforce something that we're talking about here is if the owners were, at least knew some way to contact them. Might be out of country, so that makes it harder, which I believe this is what happened next door to me, but it has happened, so. And I support Chief Britton's viewpoint that holding people accountable is the only way that we're gonna keep this ability to have short-term rentals in our city. And for those who have been running them for years and doing good, this, as it's been stated, it's not punishment, it's just, you need to get a kind of handle on what's really happening in our city. And that registry will, and I would assume it'd be accessible to you on the weekends, something that you'd have in your databases.
Well, thank you, Chief Britton,
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
So, fully in support of a registry and being able to, connect with a person in charge. My question is around, a lot of times I would think it's not obvious whether this is a short-term rental that you're pulling up to versus a house that's causing a disturbance. And so if we are legislating different rules for, a parking or a noise or whatever regulation for a short-term rental versus any other neighborhood house, how would you approach that?
Yeah,
when you're
excellent point.
pulling up? So I guess my further point is that we have all of these existing rules in our ordinances, and are those sufficient to to solve the issue on any given night?
But back to your point is, say we go to a noise disturbance or a house party, if you will. A lot of ways we determine it's a short-term rental is if there's actually someone there saying, yeah, I rented this through whatever short-term rental property. I think adding the extra legislation in terms of, just let me back up a little, like our computer system doesn't keep track of, we don't have a coding system specifically linked to, short-term rental complaint. So most of the time it's confirmed by word of mouth by someone at the property. I think having a little extra in there in terms to regulate those short-term rentals would help us out a little bit more, other than just with the regular nuisance complaints. If that makes sense.
Could I just add that it's probably likely that neighbors say, I have that short-term rental next to me is acting up again when it's called in. I would imagine that's not
that's how
unusual.
we get the information that way.
I just want to respond to your question. So the draft legislation as it's written now simply says we will enforce the codes for parking as they are in the current city ordinances. So there's no novel provisions that they would have, the police force would have to keep track of. But it is part of their registration, and it is grounds for us to penalize them.
I was going to add to that if we are able to pass this legislation and have a registration requirement, I think the question for the chief and the maybe the technology IT department is whether or not how we can get that registration info into the police department system so you can know.
Yeah.
Right away if that's a short-term rental and potentially contact information. So I think that to me reaffirms, the importance of the registration piece and what we'll put in there.
Thank you. I just want to say that at our next step, we'll be bringing to council on May 26th the draft legislation along with some key questions. I'm working with Director Zamp on this for us and Law Director for your consideration so that we can move forward with bringing it in a full reform to the committee. But thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. That's the end of my request.
Can I just ask a quick question on that? So I sent over red lines and
We got
comments, is that part of the?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we got it.
Well, are we gonna have another conversation?
Yes,
About that?
that's what this is on May 22nd.
Okay, I'm satisfied with that because I have some other issues with the legislation, but I'll bring them up at that time. So we're on to planning and development.
We are, okay, thank you. So we're going, can I invite you to the table, Director Hand?
Doesn't mean you have to come.
Ooh.
That would be rude.
That would be weird then. Thank you so much. So we wanna return to the landmark commission discussion, and I had sent out as an FYI to the council members the memo. Hi, Brooke. And do you wanna come, Maisie, and join us? I think it might be easier, yeah. The law department, along with planning, and put together a memo. Is that a printout that you have for us, or is that, those are your papers? Or you can-
These are mine.
Okay, fine, I just thought, I was wondering if you were
only
getting
one
ready
copy
to distribute. It was distributed electronically to everyone. And so I think the purpose of this discussion right now is to really talk through the 5 main points that the law department has raised, see if we can get to consensus, if we need anything else, and then decide on next steps. So, Bill, did you wanna kick us off with the first one? Do you wanna give us
Sure.
like a brief summary of each one, and then we'll talk about it?
Sure.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, so it's set up with 5 principal focus areas, which I think the planning director and I felt were those areas. They're not necessarily the only ones, but the most critical areas where I think council will want to think through the policy implications, and these are probably the areas where you may get more input at such time as you have a public hearing that may implicate or interest residents rather. So the first one, and this came up in a previous discussion, at least to some extent, is the removal of the owner consent requirement for a property to be designated as a landmark. Current ordinance does require owner consent. The revised ordinance or the proposed revised ordinance does not, and does not require any consent for the designation of a landmark historic district either. And Landmark Commission and Naylor Wellman provided a chart which shows a number of other communities and their consent requirements or absence of consent requirements, and we're not contesting the validity of that information, but we see this as a significant change in Cleveland Heights that's likely to be of interest to the public, and that council will probably want to discuss as council moves forward.
Bill, maybe
sure.
let's do one, so I wanna just ask council on the consent, does anyone have strong feelings one way or the other? I mean, we have the Landmark Commission proposing that we remove the consent requirement for both a landmark property and a landmark district, right? Is that the right terminology? So can we just talk about that for a few minutes? Sure.
I think for the singular property, I really feel strongly that that person whose property is affected should still have the ability to have consent. I mean, that to me is like a personal rights issue of ownership. When it's a district, and what is it, 60% that have to agree to it when it's a district?
Currently, it's over 50%.
Over for 50%. I can understand the nuance of the differences, but I'm really concerned about a single owner who's being asked to let their home be called a historic building, and they may or may not wish to do that. So I do feel strong about that.
Thank you.
I'm opposed to removing the consent requirement.
I agree. I know that there was also a persuasive example though of public buildings, the movie theater that was torn down by a developer who wanted to do something different with the property. That would be the only nuance I would have, is that if this is truly public buildings, that the public, participates in, that there should be a public voice in some way in that decision. But for individual homeowners, I'm in agreement with you. I think that they should be afforded consent.
So it's interesting because that came up at the last conversation. I don't think it's necessarily public versus private, but commercial
Yeah, I
versus
guess that's-
residential.
that's
I mean,
probably what
they're
I meant by
all owned, right? What, with
Yeah.
the exception, I would say the high school was just designated a landmark. Now, that is publicly owned. I mean, the school district board of, was happy to do it, but I think what we're talking about is commercial versus residential. I think, and I'll ask the director to opine, but I think it would be hard to distinguish between residential and commercial on consent. Like what does one property owner have any more right than another?
I think it would be easy to distinguish between them. I've not looked at whether that's a supportable distinction.
That's exactly what I was, yes,
Right.
I mean, we can certainly make the distinction, but
And I
under
can
what?
think of arguments that might support that distinction, but again, I haven't done any of the research.
So I really was undecided on this, so that's why I was curious, and I wanna, have this discussion. Councilman Cash?
Yeah, I mean, is the feeling to make it non-consent because there's a building that there's overwhelming public interest, but the homeowner or the owner just does not want to do it? Maybe wants to raise the building or something.
Lisa, go ahead, yeah.
So yes, that's, I think in 99.9% of the time, we are always going to have owner consent. Our opinion on Lima Commission is that the ordinance should be looked at like you do with zoning regulations and codes and things like that. It's a tool that helps to essentially preserve what the community thinks is important in its community. So what standards we are. And we've seen time and again in our community that the architecture, the historic nature of our community is something that people support. We see it in the master plan, we see it with things like that. So there are times, it doesn't happen very often, but I imagine that there are going to be times when there is a building that is so valued by the community that perhaps the property owner doesn't and is looking to demolish or allow it to demolition by neglect. And then you've lost that. So, I mean, I think of things like Tudor Taylor, which is now being renovated and historic tax credits are being used for it. Those are really significant pieces of property in our community that would be a big loss if they were gone. Park Synagogue is one of the few remaining examples of a significant architect across the world that could easily have been lost. And so this can be seen as a tool that can help at least delay potential demolition of something significant that the community values. One way maybe that could be a compromise, because I think there may also be concerns that that is something that sits just with Landmark Commission, is perhaps if there is designation without owner consent, but it requires council. Is that a step that might provide an extra piece that would make folks feel comfortable? There is an appeals process that's written into the ordinance, the new rewrite. I think for us in Cleveland Heights, we look to our neighbors like the city of Cleveland, that city of Shaker Heights, they've never required owner consent. Lakewood, they have designated, Cleveland designates structures on a pretty regular basis. Catholic churches that went through when the diocese was smaller. CMSD school buildings that have been designated. And most of them, almost all of them, have been turned over into new uses. So, and they would have been lost buildings without. So I think the other piece to think about, it's more important when we get into the demolition piece, but we are a certified local government that opens up grant funding for the community that we utilize. It also allows for local designation, opening up historic tax credits for commercial properties rehabilitation. And so we want to make sure that we're staying in alignment with Ohio standards around that as well.
And so if our communities are doing this as a non-consent, or we were able to find this sort of middle ground where it could come to council, you know, I wouldn't feel, I'd feel comfortable about that.
And there would be appeals process built into it as well throughout, I think. So there's opportunities for the property owner to speak.
Okay.
Council President Cooter, Councilman Cobb, any thoughts on this particular point?
I'm looking at the city of Cleveland landmark ordinance right now where I think council does have the authority to do it. If an owner doesn't want to give consent, I think that's worth looking at, because if we're going to give any teeth to this proposed changes, I think consent is one element of that, the removal of the property owner's consent. On the other hand, I think it needs to be a high bar in order to overcome a property owner's lack of consent. So maybe this is something that we can take a look at, look more closely at how the city of Cleveland does it.
Yeah, I'm undecided about it. I mean, I've been to Litchfield, Connecticut, where they have, you know, the 1628, you know, they have the year the house was built, and I'm sure that they have been able to do this because the properties have been protected. But I'd actually like to take a look at things like that, which I haven't done yet, and you know, before I make up my mind.
Director Hannah.
So I was just in, the landmark chair may have more, I'm sure has more knowledge about this than I do, but I looked not at Cleveland, but at Shaker Heights and Lakewood, just thinking communities kind of like us. And I think in Shaker Heights, it is ultimately the council that designates a landmark by ordinance or disapproves the proposed designation by resolution. And so there is that involvement of both the Landmark Commission and council in each case. And then Lakewood, I think it's the commission that does it, but the process kicks off with the Landmark Heritage Program or something like that, which is a separate board that makes recommendations to the Landmark Commission. So again, it's the authority is a little bit disseminated, and more people are involved in that evaluation.
If we can put in some stipulation based on the research that the law department does, that council would make, especially in a case when the owner does not consent, that it gives the council an opportunity to weigh in and also an opportunity for public support or opposition to the owner's position. So I would like to see that put in if it's possible.
Yeah.
Is there any, let's say we went in that route with council, does that obligate the city in any way? If we say to a homeowner, no, you're now on a landmark property against your wishes, would the city hold any responsibility to that landlord by doing that?
Legal responsibility, I don't think so. I guess the question is, if you run into somebody, you know, on a walk that you overruled in their objection, you know, how does that?
I just was thinking financially, if it said, you know, no.
Okay, I think that was really helpful. We do, just jumping ahead for a second, we did want to have a public hearing on this, so I think let's call this still an open item, but seems like the idea of council involvement in overriding a non-consent has some appeal. And if we could ask the law department to, I guess, start thinking of that as a direction we might go. But I think it'll be instructive to hear when we have a public hearing, if people are interested, which way this could go. I mean, I think there's just really good arguments on both sides. It's sticky. Okay, yeah.
One other issue that I'd like to talk to at that time down the road is the proximity issue that.
Oh, well, we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna talk about it now. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm just throwing this out there since it seems like there's a direction that we may be going. The Shaker example where council does something with every landmark. I wonder if, and I'm sort of asking Maisie, but also council, if that would be a desirable path, because there are a lot of landmarks in the city that people have no idea about. And I think it's probably because they're not paying attention to the landmark commission meeting. So even if everybody agrees, the landowner agrees, the neighbors agree, if you guys are certifying it by saying, yes, it is now a landmark, that brings a little bit extra light to it. So thinking about it, if that extra step would be beneficial or not.
I mean, I don't think Landmark Commission would have any objection.
Yeah.
The current way it happens is that it mostly goes through the Landmark Commission. It gets reviewed by Planning Commission. It gets reviewed by them, but it doesn't require their approval, but they usually do say yes anyway, and are in support. But basically it sits just with Landmark Commission. I don't think it would be a problem
You would need a council approval just for these issues have done
Well,
that agreement.
my feeling would be that to have, like, just as we were proposing to take out planning commission of rubber stamping everything for ease of reducing the administrative burden, I don't know if I would be so excited about having us have to, the law, every time we have a landmark to run through the council legislation process. I was thinking of it more as if there's consent, then how do we override that to protect it in an instance where we really feel like there's significant value there that overrides the property owners. Okay, so that was number one. Number two, Director Hannah's the changes to the historic designation processes.
Right.
Did you want to just give us like a minute?
Sure. So like the single property landmarks, the consent requirement is removed from the process for designating the historic district. What's a little bit different is that consent of 100% of the owners of property in a historic district is already not required. So there are cases in which properties can be pulled into a district without the owner's consent, but more than 50% of the owners must consent in order to become a historic district. So I think this is a question of, and I don't know what the answer is in terms of like what folks' perception will be in the community about, 40 homes going into a district and not a single property consents to it. How does that look? How does that feel to people? I don't know the answer, but we would have, I think, some of the same concerns. And then there's the distinction between contributing and non-contributing properties, and it's not clear if people know what that means. And there's really not a lot of difference in terms of the implications for the property, but it's a little bit more complicated. And then the other note that we had on this, on historic district designation, is that I think it was an attempt to streamline the process by removing some of the specific references to historic district and just talking about property designation and then defining property in such a way that it includes districts and other items. But I think from my perspective, in trying to work through the ordinance and understand it, I think it might be easier to follow if it were broken out separately, again, more like it is currently, because it's a little bit hard to trace through, I think.
And I think, I will be upfront, this was over 2 years ago that we were working on this, so it's been a little while. But when we were, to go back to the way we were thinking, but part of the conversation was, it's greater than 50% right now. We were not sure, and we were trying to be consistent, that if we had removed owner consent for a single property, then does that apply for a district? So we were just trying to be consistent, but I would suggest, I'm speaking on behalf of the Landmark Commission, but that staying with the over 50% wouldn't be an issue as long as it works with how the ordinance is written and consent. And then I just wanted to, the contributing and non-contributing is more about is it a historic building that contributes to the historic district, or if it isn't. And so non-contributing they wouldn't have to follow what happens to a landmark district, contributing landmark property. That might not be clear as well, so we'd have to figure it out. So like if it's, a new construction in a historic district and it's already designated as non-contributing, then it would not, that property would not have to come before a landmark commission to do any of the things. But that probably isn't clear enough.
Is that with an asterisk for proximity?
Right.
If a non-contributing property is in proximity to a contributing property in the
No.
district?
That would be different, I think. It's,
Okay.
but we
Right.
need to figure that out, right? So that's, yes.
I would say, and unless anybody strongly agrees, that we would, I feel like we'd more than 50% for consent in an historic district seems right to me. And I was more bothered personally by moving the consent from an entire district than I was from one house. So does anybody disagree?
I didn't follow what you said, but I'm opposed to,
Removing consent.
yes.
Yes.
So
Leaving it with the 50% or more is what I was trying to say, which is what it is right now.
Honestly, I don't like the idea of designating entire districts. For a couple of reasons, one of which, and especially if we are not, if there are there are property owners who are opposing this, but they fall in that district, it gets back to the same issue of removing consent, which I am already opposed to. I think from an administrative side, I mean, there are 56 current landmarks.
The high school is 56.
That would be
That would be 57. Now we're talking about potentially blocks or entire neighborhoods with dozens or, up to hundreds of contributing properties. Now we're looking at the administrative burden not only to landmarks, but if any of that is coming to council, that has to go through law, that has to go through additional processes. I'm concerned about that administrative burden, then also how that may slow investments, people trying to just update their homes, but have to go through that entire process. I've spoken with council people in Cleveland that have a pretty robust district landmark designation, and even though the designation is for contributing properties within the district, I was hearing issues of getting contractors to even come into the district to have a conversation about working within the district because they understand the administrative burdens and the additional burdens on contractors going through the process. And I don't think we are in a position where we should be slowing or turning away investments into our historic properties, not just historic landmark properties, but just our 100-year-old properties in general.
Are you proposing that we might consider removing the idea of a historic district completely from the landmark?
That would be my
ordinance?
position.
Does anyone have thoughts on that?
Well, it makes me want to ask the planning director, do you know of such a dynamic where when you have historic district designations, there's less investment in the commercial areas? Is
Well,
that a deterrent?
As the councilman was speaking, I'm wondering, and this is worth a call to his counterparts in Cleveland, but so in Cleveland, the design review is limited to those historic properties or those districts. If you're not within one of those districts, you don't have a design review at all. Whereas in Cleveland Heights, you're going to the ABR, or the way we would propose it, or you're going to the Landmark Commission. So it would be the same burden. So I think that might be a distinction in Cleveland. There's a process there that you have to go through.
Because now they have a process. In Cleveland Heights, it is technically an extra step to come to Landmark Commission for current landmark property owners, but we generally work in conjunction with ABR. We often have joint meetings so that the property owner is either only coming to us and ABR is reviewing, but we're the first step or it's happening at the same time. Like we get cell tower antenna reviews on a pretty regular basis, and we try and do those together with ABR as one meeting that they're coming to.
So currently there are two. We're using, this would replace ABR review.
One of the things we're looking at in the zoning code update is to sort of mirror what Cleveland does in a way is that you don't have to go to two boards.
Yeah.
You have to go to one board if you're historic or in a district. You come to landmark. If you're not, you go to APR. But you still have to get a design review no matter what. That's what we're trying to accomplish.
But yeah, the difference with Cleveland is that they don't have to do anything if it's a non-historic, non-landmark.
And then the issue I was hearing was that in places like Ohio City and Tremont, where there are landmark neighborhoods or designated zones, some contractors don't want to work in those because they know of the additional burdens placed on them and challenges placed on them within
Because there
the
just isn't any anywhere
landmarks.
else. And I would suggest that places like Tremont and Ohio City and Gordon Square are revitalized because of the historic architecture and overlay that's been there and the investment that's gone in to those. I think those are neighborhoods that didn't see investment until there was recognition of that quality of architecture. So, but I think for the city of Cleveland, there isn't any review required unless you are historic, a landmark property, which is probably why some contractors don't want to go in.
So the city is considering a number of housing-related initiatives like accessory dwelling units, the infill housing, and I just wonder how those initiatives would fare in a historic district. Were that to be a
So generally speaking, preservation and development are not oppositional. They've worked successfully together to support a community. So like an ADU is not something, if you have, a very historic structure or building and then or house, and you're putting in an ADU that is not compatible, we might want to say, let's think about what that looks like and does it touch on the building if you're doing, already if we're looking at additions to a landmark property, we're gonna be asking questions about, so that we don't lose integrity for the original structure. But compatible also doesn't mean matching exactly, doesn't mean it's the same materials, it just means it's compatible. And I think any of those kind of things, solar panels are great. We're not going to say no to those, but we might not want them all over the facade. But I think it's mostly common sense.
Okay, we're gonna have to move a bit quicker, but as we're
Sorry.
talking, as we're talking, what I am thinking, and I just wanna take the temperature, is that just based on this initial conversation, working towards a revised draft of the legislation that we can put out to the public prior to a public hearing. So if everyone's okay with that, what I'd like to suggest for the first one is what we had said, which was to look at a model that is, council overriding a non-consent. And for the districts, I'd like to keep let's call it our draft legislation. I'd like to keep it at 50% or above consent, but then knowing that you feel strongly about it and that we'll take community input and bring, we'll have another bite. This won't be the last bite at the apple to make decisions. So does that sound okay for this? So Director Hanna, for number 2, we'll actually revert the legislation to what it was initially. Then number 3, Law Department had raised the concerns around requirements for removal of landmark status makes removal more onerous, which is intentional. Anything you want to flag for us on that?
2 things, I guess. One is to recognize that currently the owner of a landmark can request the removal of the designation. Sort of full stop with, submit a petition requesting that it be removed. And I presume they typically explain why and so forth. The proposed revised ordinance requires that the property must have lost the criteria for designation, the qualities for which it was originally designated. So that's a different hurdle to clear. And then in terms of the sort of the burden, and I think it jumps out most in the district context where 2/3 of the owners need to request, and that's current and as proposed, removal of the designation for the district. For individuals now, rather than a petition submitted, it has to be a written letter sent by certified mail. And for the district, 2/3 of the owners must, again, request that removal with a separate letter sent by certified mail for each. And I don't know if the planning director is excited about getting all of those letters potentially, but my concern is that it seems in 2026 like maybe that's a solution in search of a problem. I'm not sure what the purpose of that is, except that it does make it harder both for the people requesting removal and for the people facilitating the processing of that request internally.
I feel like a web form might be more like a web, filling out an official submission, right? An electronic official submission of a letter makes more sense than certified. Any thoughts on this from council? That was the one thing that I, caught. It's just, I personally would like to see all of our processes move away from antiquated, and this seems to be moving us a little bit backwards. And I'll just throw out there, if they have to meet those criteria, which I actually liked, I thought the criteria were made a lot of sense. But now I'm thinking about it in terms of the non-consent. Like if council can override the designation of a landmark, can we also override demolition, like the opposite? And I don't know if you. The council can override demolition.
Are we talking about delisting or are we talking about demolition?
Oh, sorry, the removal, delisting. Well, I guess, yeah. Well, yeah. Let's talk about delisting because that's where we are right now.
Right.
I was reading the
delisting right now. It's a request that comes in, which actually has never happened. But I don't know if there's a role that council can play there, if that feels more comfortable, or.
Does anyone feel strongly about this, or can we leave this up to the law department to suggest how they prefer?
And there are some other templates out there where council is involved in that. I think again that happens in Shaker, but it may also prescribe some bases. We can double check that and provide that information to council.
Maisie, how often does that happen?
Delisting? It doesn't. The times that it's happened is just went out of my head. St. Albans Church, which burned down, and so obviously, so it was officially de-landmarked. But and then the Berger Memorial, which was in front of the JCC, and that was a designated landmark, but it was moved to the new JCC location, and so it was de-landmarked in Cleveland Heights. Those are the only times.
With that kind of frequency, it seems to me that we can leave it as is, yeah. That's fine. With the consideration of a website form in case. I
think we should get the law department sort of adjustment to the system, maybe.
Okay.
How that works.
Okay, so we're hearing we would be okay if it was left as is, but we're also very open to suggestions from the law department on improvements to that section. Demolition.
I guess, sorry. So the one reason why this has not come up yet is because of the owner consent required to get initial landmark status. So now if we're talking about greatly expanding the number of landmark properties, either individual or by district, there's a very good chance that this could come up.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I think we should think about, if nothing else, a better process to
consider those requests.
Absolutely.
And think about them in
tandem,
I think is a good point, right? Like we have to consider changes to both of them together. Same with this. So the next one is demolition.
So the current ordinance provides that a landmark property can't be demolished without landmark commission approval. But then the process as it unfolds is that if permission isn't granted, the property owner has up to 4 months to negotiate with the landmark commission and the city, and that period of time can be extended further to see if there's a way to kind of resolve the predicament. And if it is if no resolution is reached, then the request is considered granted, so the demolition can proceed. The proposed revised ordinance prohibits demolition in the absence of meeting, and I collapsed a couple of these together, but a few exceptions provided in the code. One is that demolition is ordered by the building commissioner because there's an emergency due to unsafe or dangerous conditions. Or if the owner demonstrates to the satisfaction of the Landmark Commission that the denial of a demolition request is inconsistent with a legitimate interest in the health, safety, and welfare of the city. The owner could also demonstrate that the landmark either isn't habitable or is otherwise not safe, or that repair and rehabilitation is not economically feasible and the condition did not result from intentional damage or neglect of current or prior owners, quote, with the likely intention of making the repair or rehabilitation not economically feasible. And then the last one is demolition for an incompatible addition or a part of the property that's not historically significant in circumstances where the demo will not adversely affect the historic significance of the landmark. And I think that our concerns when we talk through this, in large part, revolved around, in some cases, the use of language that's somewhat subjective. And I'm not sure how easy, I think it would be very hard to prove that somebody did something or didn't do something with the likely intention of making repair or rehabilitation of the property not economically feasible in the future. And so I can see, controversies arising that become pretty locked down.
And that would be for the Landmark Commission to be determining.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
And then the other issue, and I know there's the economic hardship path that might address this, but the other issue is if the property is in a condition where it's not economically feasible to rehabilitate, and setting aside how it got that way, and demolition hasn't been ordered by the building commissioner, and the owner hasn't demonstrated to the satisfaction of the Landmark Commission that not allowing demolition is inconsistent with a legitimate interest in health, safety, or welfare. We have, as a city, there are sometimes issues where the city struggles with addressing nuisance properties already. And so here you're talking about a property potentially that could be in pretty bad shape to the point where nobody wants to invest in it because they can't get a return. But it may not be quite so bad that the building commissioner has taken action. And it just seems like a recipe for properties sitting there until they get bad enough. And from a policy standpoint, I think that's something that council probably wants to talk about. And there may be pieces that we're missing, but that's what I think we saw in the ordinance.
If we can too, I'd like to include Margaret into the conversation. She's here. Yes. And she's
Hold up a chair, yeah.
I think there are two pieces, right? There's just straight demolition and then there's demolition by neglect. And they are two halves of the same coin often. And so the concern, and I think it's a community-wide concern around demolition, but particularly for landmark properties, I mean, we clearly as a community are valuing these properties and we have landmarked them, so we don't want them to just disappear overnight, which is the way it's set up right now, basically, is that can happen. But you maybe can talk better about in Cleveland and other communities around demolition.
We have seen, examples of investors that purchase landmark properties, but then often they're out of town, they don't do anything, and they know upon purchase of the property that maybe it has several code violations or needs a certain amount of repairs, but as they do nothing and just hold on to the properties further deteriorate to the point where then a building official can come in and issue a condemnation notice. And so I think that is really the heart of what we're trying to prevent. Or maybe somebody has a property and they know that the roof is leaking or water's coming into the basement. And instead of remediating those issues, they just close it up and walk away and wait till the point where again, it can be issued a condemnation notice. So we would like to address that scenario in some fashion.
Madam Chair, could I?
Yeah, of course.
I thought in the conversation we had about this, that there was also concern, not about the problem property, but the property that's in perfectly good shape. And they want to demolish it and build something there.
Yes, there's two different issues, right? There's properties that are in great shape and somebody just wants to demolish it so they can build something new, or it wasn't a landmark, but the movie theater is an example of that, which it was in excellent shape and could have easily been rehabbed and got demolished and has been sitting empty for a long time. So the worry is that there's existing good condition buildings that are landmarks that can just get demolished. And then there's the second issue, which is essentially demolition by neglect, where you're purchasing a property and then neglecting it with the long-term goal of that it'll end up being demolished because it's.
And I think that's where our sort of policy, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Where our policy question came in was, it's mostly around the situations in which repair and rehab isn't economically feasible, at the time that the request is put forth. Because going into that analysis of how it came to be that that's the situation doesn't necessarily do anything for the neighbors or the neighborhood. You still have a property where you're not going to attract an investor unless there's a grant that comes through, maybe because we're a certified local government or what have you. But short of that, you have a property that nobody's going to invest into repair and rehab, but that's an adverse impact on the neighborhood. So I think that's the one that we were focused on.
I mean, can I ask, it sounds like the problem you're trying to handle is one that's actually going to be worsened if by one of these conditions. I mean, from what Director Hannah is saying in terms of leaving it until it's
Until that condemnation.
Yeah, until the condemnation order. So, I mean, if everybody is okay, can I ask Director Hannah for you to suggest how you might fix that section?
I think that's up to council.
Well, I think it's hard for us. It's a little bit hard for us to make recommendations.
We can try to come up with some language. I'm not sure that we've looked for this purpose because we thought the discussion with members of council and the Landmark Commission would be useful in trying to understand this. And I think knowing now what we've just talked through, we can do a little bit of looking and look for a solution.
And I would, sorry.
Well, I'm just like looking at number 3, the demolition is for an incompatible addition or portion. It's like if you're looking for a loophole, it just looks like you could find one, And I mean, because you're just looking for one, is it right, as a result?
Yeah.
It just has to be one exception is met. I don't know, the nebulous nature of some of this stuff is a little bit of a concern.
And just going back to what we have now is someone can just request, right?
There's a delay that's built into the process, but right.
They can just request. So I'm also wondering if we just have this lever of council oversight over the designation, delisting, and demolition, if that is the hook to make sure that property owners can indicate to Landmark Commission what they'd like to do, but that doesn't mean it's an automatic occurrence, right? Like whatever they want to do happens, there is a check and they'll have to know. And I'm curious, Director Hannah, once you give it some thought, if you think that would be enough of a detriment for, property owners that actually just want to let them sit, knowing that council will have some oversight there, what that might look like.
I lost you at the
So this idea of not having owners purchase landmark designated properties and then willfully allow them to sit, to allow them to be demolished. Like if they know that ultimately we can decline that request or say, you're not allowed to demolish, does that have teeth to say you actually should be fixing up your property? Incentivizing to fix up as opposed to...
Well, and if all of the processes that we have in place are working, there should be citations along the way as the property gets worse, right? And all those kinds of things. So hopefully those are sufficient safeguards. in the event that it really is to that point where it's not economically feasible, I think that'll be tough for council, because again, the question then is, what do you do? But that process that structure might work, yeah.
I would think that if those citations exist, which they probably do at this point, we're talking about this particular property, that the housing department's opinion, if this property comes to the Landmark Commission as a subject, that the housing department would have an important role in determining that this is indeed economically not feasible, or it is economically feasible. So I don't know if you can put that in legislation or not, but it seems like some definition of who determines if it's economically or not economically feasible.
The burden is on the property owner under the ordinance.
So would they have to call in an appraiser?
Or a constructor.
And we've seen examples where you bring reports to show that you've, bid out the work in one fashion versus the cost of demolition and show the committee.
And the cost of the property, yeah.
So it's on the property owner.
And I think that's probably the way to leave it in terms of who has the burden, if that test remains.
And then last thing is the proximity piece, and I'll just say, quickly that we agreed that the proximity wasn't quite from what the Landmark Commission explained that it should do, didn't come through in the way that the ordinance, the revised ordinance was drafted, and we have, the law department kind of saying that same thing in their analysis. I would just say that if the proximity piece is only to require some sort of review of approximate property in relation to the landmark, to me that seemed excessive. And with the amount of procedure we have when somebody wants to make changes to their property and the amount of housing diversity we have in the city, it seemed to me, again, just excessive, right? If somebody wants to build a beautiful modern, as we have in some of the neighborhoods, a beautiful modern home next to a beautiful historic home, that's kind of what makes us the cool place to live. So I saw this as just, I would rather not have this as part of the new ordinance, but I'm open to other thoughts or Landmark Commission, anybody?
If I could just real quick, in terms of drafting, right now I think the definition could be tightened up, and if it remains should be tightened up. It says the proposed definition is the purpose of determining compatibility of design, the potential for one property by virtue of its location to materially and adversely affect a landmark property. Proximity shall include, it doesn't say proximity means, and then that says properties on the same side of the street that abut the landmark, across the street immediately opposite the landmark, and all other properties abutting the landmark, so like the street behind, the backyards and that kind of thing. So and then when it goes on to further discuss it, and proximity only comes up like twice in the chapter, but there's one part where it says that the chapter applies to properties that are in proximity. And then there's another part where it sounds as if it says the owner shall bear the burden of proving by a preponderance of the evidence that a proposed change is consistent with preservation of the character defining features of the landmark property or landmark properties in proximity, which would not include any non-landmarked property in proximity, but it doesn't seem consistent with the initial proposition, so.
Yes, we recognize that isn't as clear as it should be.
Okay.
I think our goal is that sort of material adverse impact that we were hoping to avoid, right? And it's almost hard to imagine what that might be, but in an overabundance of caution of trying to bubble wrap our historic landmarks, I think that's where we were, but I don't know if it's a thing that we'll chain ourselves to a tree for. Yeah.
I mean, I just, if you
if
think
that
about,
makes sense,
I mean,
right?
if you think about it from a high school perspective now that that's a designated landmark, that would mean that nobody could build theoretically, right? That you would be prohibiting from anybody buying either an infill lot. I don't
Well, it
think we
wouldn't be
have
prohibited. I think our goal was that
like a design
we
review.
wanna, right, that there's some, that we could have not official say, maybe not official say, but an opportunity as the Landmark Commission to respond.
I guess my
Right.
feeling is that like that rationale is not enough to put a
Put it
homeowner
in.
through the additional process and
Right.
administrative burden of doing that.
Which I can see.
Just agree with what you're saying.
And I'm wondering if, because I know in past practice, we have encouraged or allowed the Landmark Commission to comment on properties going before the ADR and the Planning Commission. Sealy Meadowbrook was one as an example. So maybe it's just sort of memorializing that, not even in a code, but as a
As a
practice.
Okay, so thank you. We got through the 5 pieces. Timing wise, this was the last thing. We have the ADU hearing on June 2nd. We're gonna need some, sorry, Director Hannah, we're gonna need some additional work from the law department to clean this up based on the conversation. But I'm really looking into planning, and Director Hannah, what would be timing that you would wanna see a public hearing? Because we just need to post that legislation with enough time for people to have some time to review it before the public hearing would be my preference. So it's, give people some notice.
That makes sense. I guess my question, and you may have this question, is does council want to see an ordinance with some of these? Because we didn't pin down specific language tonight. I think we have some insights, and I do have a question on this last piece, which is whether it seemed like maybe there's support for removing proximity entirely, but I'm not sure.
Yes, sorry, I should have said that. That is what I was proposing, and it seemed like there was at least agreement, yeah.
Silence is deafening.
Well, there were 2 agreements and the
Yeah.
rest silent. So yeah, I would have removed that completely.
Okay. So I mean, addressing these 5 is possible, although we do need to do a little research into some of the, council involvement pieces and stuff. I don't think this is gonna be ready for June 2nd.
No, that's the ADU. I'm just saying we already
Okay.
have like another public hearing in early June, so I'm actually looking like
Out of it. Yeah.
past that, like.
Can we report back in June and let you know where we are?
Sure. I mean, the first council meeting maybe in
Well,
June?
the first council meeting is June 1st.
No, I mean, just an update. Well, that's
Oh,
2 weeks. Oh, is that?
Yeah, how about the second meeting in June?
15th.
Great.
That's doable.
Okay, without further ado, I'm gonna pass it along to Community Relations and
Thank you.
Recreation. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. And so we'll be moving on to community relations and recreation. And I'll invite members of the Parks and Rec Advisory Board to come up to the table. And if we don't already all know each other, we can start with a quick round of introductions. I think you most likely know the council.
So,
So if you just give your names and your involvement with the committee and how long you've been involved.
sure, I'm Peggy Spate, and I've been on the Parks and Recs Advisory Board for 5 years, 3 directors and 3 presidents in 5 years. And Tom's been there.
Some of that time, 3 maybe? Hard to know at this point. Yeah, I think 3. Yeah. I'm also on the school board, and I'm not as impressive as Peggy though. Puts a lot of time and effort into our green spaces.
Thank you.
And point of clarification, you are a member of the committee and then you are elected to the school board, and in the legislation there is a representative from the school board supposed to be on the committee. Are you?
Haven't come in 5 years.
Okay, so by default,
Joe D'Amato did come, yes. The answer is yes.
you're serving that
Yeah.
that liaison role as well.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm allowed to be 2 things, but our charter is not that important,
So
I guess.
we'll get to potential charter updates and talking through, but this is sort of our first pilot of trying to bring together a citizen advisory board with the representative council committee. And since we're also simultaneously holding the council committees as part of committee of the whole, this is the structure that we're at least going to be trying for the next couple months to see if we can move forward pieces of legislation and priorities from resident feedback through legislation and into actual use. So I want to talk about specifically about the committee and how it relates to council, but I did want to talk if you want to update anything on the Youth Advisory Council, or at least the idea. Doesn't need to be formal, but just kind of lay out what you had provided last time, because I think there might be a possibility of just ad hoc, tying that into what we're doing here.
I mean, my plan was to come to the next meeting of the advisory board. Is it next week?
I think it's this week, isn't it?
Oh, is it this week? I have it on my calendar, I can tell you that. And I was just gonna basically present the idea of having a youth advisory board that we actually tried to set up in a codified way, but then found out subsequently after we did a lot of research that if you're not 18, you can't be a voting member of a committee. So we thought if the Parks and Rec Advisory Board was willing to have a youth advisory board come to quarterly or something, just to check in with the young people that use the parks and have them serve in a kind of advisory capacity with as a non-voting members. So that's kind of a preview of what I'm going to say whenever this meeting is.
So it'll be on the 20th, so not this
Okay.
Wednesday, but the following Wednesday at 6 p.m.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any update other than, we had to abandon the idea of having an actual
Formalized youth council.
formalized committee, but we still want to involve them. And there are, Elizabeth Kirby has already said she would help us recruit, people. I want to talk about structure, and what it would look like, because we don't want to leave out non-public school students or, we just need to go. I just want to take the temperature of everybody if they're like okay with the idea, and then the how we would do it and what it would look like.
So would these young people under 18, I assume,
Yeah.
would they actually have a committee of different schools that met and talked about issues and then brought them to us? Or are you thinking that you just identify some students to occasionally come to the meeting and individually give us some feedback?
Well, yes, more of the second.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
They wouldn't, since it's hypothetical right now, maybe they would, just listening to you say this, maybe they would want to meet at some point by themselves, it would be informal because they would have no, specific designation. But I think the main thing is to hear from, for your committee to hear from young people about programming, about amenities, about that kind of.
Great. Okay, so we'll learn more on the 20th.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Just a process question about, so we're smushing the advisory board here, but then the advisory board is also going to be meeting.
Well, we need to talk through
Okay,
structure.
okay.
That was actually the second thing that I wanted to talk through is just the overall committee structure. So the impetus for our conversation at the council retreat was this committee has, as other resident advisory committees, has expressed frustration with sometimes feeling a lack of connection with either the administration or council, and feeling that it's more difficult than it should be to communicate or to partner or to move things along. So one one potential solution is that we just bring you to these committees. Simultaneously, council was having the conversation about a challenge of working with members of the specific council committees, because if we're discussing the legislation, we can't even have a conversation one-on-one that is being discussed in a council committee. So this bringing it to committee of the whole would allow us to have additional conversations and potentially more productive work. So bringing the advisory board to these conversations is hopefully a way to just streamline the process and get feedback from residents that are, you know, involved in parks work and recreation activities more directly to council that then we can act on.
So do you mean bring the whole committee?
That's what we're discussing.
Okay.
But this is the first time that we've been able to have this conversation. So I did want to hear from you.
But that's the goal, to have the whole committee at times meet with.
Potentially.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Can I add something? I mean, and let's just sort of take the whole idea of council as a whole, meshing with all the committees. If we can just park that aside and look at the need, I mean, the current setup of having a lay committee and a council committee that has to feed off the same administrative team. And a problem that I've seen with your committee over the years of, how can I say this politely, but sort of a lack of mission, a lack of, an ununderstanding lack of purpose possibly, if that makes any sense. You guys have tried to create some of your own purposes, and I don't want to say it's been shot down, but I think it's been, no, you can't do that, because that's what the administration does. I think it's a better situation, just as far as an efficiency goes, to find a way that council committee and the slate committee can, maybe for the time being, run a parallel path, but as sort of a trial, which I think we all kind of are interested in feeling out, is, well, why don't we try to find a way that, you know, when it comes to, you know, Parks and Rec, you know, let's see if we can get a dedicated liaison from the administration to be part of this too. So it's really a three-way game. Have a set agenda that kind of starts off with updates from the Parks and Recs department of what they think that a committee needs to know about in order to get feedback from council and feedback from the lake committee. And then the things that are coming down the pike that are legislative in nature, because we're a legislative body, get those presented to us so then we could then pass them on to the bigger council. Now, how this fits with council as a whole kind of sounds clunky. Sounds like there's a lot more now people at the table, because not only was just the three members of the Parks and Recs Council Committee and your committee, but now we have the whole of council at this.
And then I would add on to that by saying that Director Gonzalez was planning on coming tonight, but since tonight's agenda is heavy on this conversation, more of a structural conversation and not necessarily specific programs or policies, I told him, you know, don't stick around until 7:30 on a Monday night. But he is planning on attending future committees of the Community Relations and Recreation. And if you are able to come to these, then we would be able to have that exact structure. So we are working through the conversation of the process, and that's why it feels a little like we're just focused on what the structure is versus working through individual policies. But what would, in my mind, what would happen is, you know, we would be talking about any priority that has been coming up in the Parks and Recreation Board, or any priority that's coming from council or the administration, and then we would just be able to have that two-way dialogue. That's sort of the streamlined idea of having this all together. So I do think, at least in the short term and potentially longer term, there's still a need for the Parks and Rec Board to continue meeting separately. A, to consider any like bylaws or structure changes. B, because, we're down to 4 members that have met before. Now we've added 3 new members, but we need to at least have that conversation. So I think I'm not trying to replace that, but if there's a time that maybe you feel like you only need to meet quarterly as an individual group and then come to here on a regular basis, that could be part of it as well. But want to get your feedback of, do you think this structure will help move the ball forward in terms of prioritization and being able to communicate directly with council versus the previous structure?
You go ahead.
I've never been president of it at all. So, well, first of all, I just want to say that I think one of the big problems with Parks and Rec's advisory board has been that all the turnover. Ever since I've been on it, we haven't had a president and good people, but I'm just, as somebody who's run meetings a lot, we haven't had anybody who's had a set agenda and really worked through it on a basis that produced some results. So it sort of has been like Groundhog Day, I feel. Don't you have that feeling sometimes that we have the same conversations over and over, that they just spin around and we don't spit them out? So I just want to say that the overall structure of all of this doesn't really have as much to do with what you're proposing as our own internal structures. And my hope is that now that we have our 3rd director and our 3rd or 4th president, that maybe we can institute some really good management of meeting processes with agendas. My conception of how this was all supposed to work was that we would have meetings and we would decide what needed legislation, and that we would have a rep from council at our meetings who would then help us to move that forward, so that we be the generator, and then our council person would move it forward to wherever it needed to go to be legislation, which we did with a couple of small things like our new bylaws, again allowing dogs to be walked in every park rather than just one after the 10-year pilot project in one park. So I don't know. Are you proposing that if we go to this format and we have independent meetings, that we would have a council person at that meeting, or that we would then not have a council person at our own meeting, but that we would come to this body and ask for legislation?
My hope is that we could streamline it and minimize meetings that I would be going back and forth to.
Gotcha.
Because if you're able to come to here to to initiate those requests or those conversations, we could just have that with all of council. I could still be the
pipeline.
Yeah, the liaison to that group, but that we don't need to come to a meeting and then come to another meeting to introduce it. I'd say the other piece that was missing and is no longer the case is an administration and a director that's willing to meaningfully engage.
Right.
And Director Gonzalez did indicate that he would like to have as a standing agenda sort of a director's report to committee of the whole in terms of what Parks and Rec has been doing or is planning. So you would get that update, and then you would be able to provide feedback from the resident perspective as well, and we could just all have that conversation together.
So he wouldn't be presenting that to our standalone?
Potentially not. Potentially that would be here.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea was just trying to streamline as much as possible. So if we're having that conversation, then we can also have that conversation directly with other council members. And if there are legislative priorities that need to come out of that, then we can have that here.
So probably the most streamlined, if we went with this way of doing it, the most streamlined way would be just to have a couple of representatives from our committee come to this committee, because you wouldn't want all 9 or however many people, because then we'd be having our meeting here. So we would discuss it.
So maybe just like the president, vice president, or chair, vice chair, or something like that. Okay.
Would that make sense? if we did go with that direction?
Yes, I agree with that. This is not probably conducive to like a discussion of like the minutia of Parks and Rec.
Mhm.
Elected officials can be intimidating. Look at how intimidating Craig is
Oh,
right
I know,
now.
I was feeling that
He's
while
not
I
even
was
wearing a tie
speaking.
tonight.
Yeah, yeah.
So, we wouldn't really be discussing. I suggest that we have the Parks and Rec meet, have only come to this meeting maybe once every month or two even, and have our
Yeah.
own meetings where we can discuss and generate Parks and Rec ideas. I don't think that like learning about something from Director Gonzalez and then trying to discuss it in this forum would be that easy. But having maybe the leadership, whoever that was, come would be a good idea too.
Okay.
I think that is, I mean, it would be nice if we had some staff member, high-level staff member from Parks and Recs come to our meeting, because I've always found that helpful, because it's a vast department, it's huge. There's all these sports, and I don't even know some of them because I don't speak sports, but it's overwhelming. And so having somebody who can kind of like say, well, no, that's not how we're working this, we're doing it this way. So if Inspector Gonzalez isn't coming to us to explain things,
Maybe
it would be
Jonathan
nice to have, another staff member from Parks and Recs come to a meeting so that we could have that dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree
Wouldn't
with
you
that
think?
completely.
Yeah.
We as a group don't know anything.
Yeah, we don't.
And if we don't have the ability to ask questions to somebody in the administration, we can chat. But
Mhm.
that's been the problem, is that we haven't had someone from the administration side all that often. The legislature side for you, very rare indeed. So yes, maybe the committee meets here with you guys and the council as a whole. You guys just twice a month?
Quarterly?
This is once a month.
Okay, so
This
maybe every
structure
other
would be.
month then. I don't think we have enough ideas
All
to
right,
fill an hour.
we can continue to iterate, and I'll come next Wednesday and then we can discuss that. Moving on to the Youth Scholarship Fund. So to update everyone, Cleveland Heights has a youth scholarship fund or youth donation fund. We periodically get donations into that. Right now, the annual Happy 5K is typically the only or main funder of that, and the idea is that those funds would be used to provide youth scholarships to students in need who want to participate in youth recreation, but could use some help paying for that. So that's the intent of it. Historically, it has only been able to be used for Cleveland Heights internal recreation, and there's a lot of other nonprofit or other entities that put on youth recreation in Cleveland Heights, but those have not historically been eligible. So working with the finance director and Parks and Rec and law, we don't have a final ruling on this, but it sounds like we think we would be able to open that up to additional organizations. And so what the next step would be, in my view, is to update the Youth Scholarship Fund once this is fully approved, and then we can start communicating that through the community center and other communication channels. But at least hopeful that it will we'll be able to expand the use of those funds. And in this committee has historically been more involved in, I don't know if approving or directing some of that, but it's been determined that these are internal city funds and that they should be directed, or they need to be directed through department heads and approved by finance and all of that. So, but with that comes potential additional flexibility in a way that we can serve more kids that want to be involved in these.
I've always said I would love to see that fund used, not
Right.
sit there growing.
That's the goal.
And I would ask that do you know that will that require some legislation, some amendments to legislation, or how does the process work to open it up to other entities?
Right, unclear at this point, but potentially no. potentially it's more of some internal policies and then actually just communication. So I don't want to speak for Director Gonzalez of what he, would need to actually implement it, but we're hopeful that that would be the case.
Thank you.
Yeah, if there is legislation, I will certainly look into that and then sponsor something.
I have two.
He's the chair.
I'm sorry.
He's the chair. I'm
sorry. Let me weigh in on a couple of things. First, what you mentioned earlier about serving on the rec board and then being elected. There's, as far as I know, and the law director's not here, there's no prohibition against that. However, if the school board member has not been regularly attending, and there's a provision that says if you miss 4 meetings in a year without an excused absence, then you're removed. But maybe you can have a conversation with him about maybe dropping off, you taking that role, and then that allows us to appoint another resident to serve on that board. I think what you also talked about, I think it's too unwieldy for you guys to be coming to the committee of the whole meetings. And in the ideal world, how this would work is because the chair of this committee is an official member of that board, would attend the meetings. If the chair isn't available, then I'm sure one of us would go to the meetings and then come back to city council and then report at our committee of the whole what happened at the Park and Rec board. But for the prior year, we had no one attending, and there also was no city employee representative. I think now there's no issue with either the Director Gonzalez or one of his assistant directors coming to your meetings. So I think that the problems that you had, particularly over the last year and with the turnover, we can address those and get the committee to return to the function, and then you guys are able to have your separate meetings and go in depth into issues. Lastly, on the scholarship funds, I think it is up to City Council to determine how we want those funds to be used. And if we want to delegate to the Rec Advisory Board that they weigh in on that, I think that's an appropriate function of City Council. I understand, the director may have a different view on that, but we have control over the funding, and that could certainly be some authority that we give the Park and Rec Board to determine how that money should be used.
As far as that youth financial aid or whatever we want to call it goes, it's when you spoke of donations, I'm really unclear about how a private citizen would make a donation to a city-funded, line item. I mean, you might want to check with the law department or one of the lawyers here about that. I don't really understand it because, in a nonprofit, you make a donation and you get a letter saying you've made a donation. How can I give money to the city? That's the basic question. Does anybody have?
Well, that is a good point in that we talked a little bit about the fact that it is a city fund means that it's not tax deductible. So like I am a major sponsor of the race often, and it is not tax. I mean, it's a business expense, but it's not for if you were just somebody donating. It is not. It could be some way we do a 501c3 to
bridge.
For whoever runs it, if they runs it.
So I would just say this, for this conversation, I think law and finance are looking into those intricacies and we'll let that process play out. But in terms of, directing or getting suggestions or feedback on where those funds could be deployed, I think the thing that we have been struggling with is an assumed prohibition on spending those funds outside of city run events. And if that's no longer the case, then I think it opens up, a lot more opportunity for kids to be involved in other sports. So that's the goal. That's what we're working for.
Okay. Sorry. One more point. Councilman Cobb, we thought we had the authority about how the money was dispersed, and because they did for a long time, they had to sign the Parks and Rec committee or advisory board. We can't find any record of that being the case now, and so the last I heard from the administration was that it was going to be run on the city side or decided how it was spent, but I don't know. Historically, it was the Parks and Rec board who brought it in and dispersed it, but that does not need to be the case, and if there's a different structure, that's fine too.
That's a conversation we need to have with the law director and the finance director, but ultimately, I believe it is our call. If we need to, pass some legislation to empower them, I don't know that we would need to do that, provided that the administration is fine with how it's with our asking that they be the advisory board on how that money be spent or allocated.
I feel it should be a department, personally, I feel it should be a departmental thing, that the Department of Parks and Rec should establish some policies about how that fund, which is a city fund, should be, distributed. When a family comes and is unable to pay or wants to apply for the funds.
And that seems to me to be an excellent topic that the Parks and Rec Advisory Board would discuss and try to reach some consensus with the city administration and make a recommendation back to council as to how it should be handled.
And I'll use that segue to say that we can continue that conversation on the 20th.
Sure.
And hopefully by then we'll have a little bit more clarity on functionally policy or internal policy wise what needs to happen, if anything. And then the last thing I want to note, because we do have another meeting after this, that there's going to be an open house on the for the South Rink. That's May 27th from 5 to 7 p.m. So this is the same consultants that are doing our overall Parks, Recreation, and Open Source Master Plan are convening a sort of a focus group open house on the South Rink topic, knowing that that is a big topic of conversation of what recommendations may come out of the Parks and Rec Open Source Master Plan as they are finalizing those possibilities and recommendations to council. They're going to be hosting that open house on the 27th. So mark your calendars if you want to get more information about possibilities of what what could happen with the South Rink, whether it's updated or allowed to basically the capital improvements to go into recreating the ice rink as it was, or what other options are there. So that'll be the conversation on the 27th.
Okay, this is another kind of going round and round, having addressed this in many meetings that we had. Parks and Recs did make the recommendation unanimously. No, one person said no, to turn it into a field house. And
When you say Parks and Rec,
Parks and Rec made that recommendation.
The advisory board?
A couple of years ago. Yeah.
Okay, so then now we're getting to the point of we're having a conversation that's going to be included in an official city master plan. So taking that into account along with resident feedback, and then
that'll be a decision that council makes.
What is recommended will be the recommendation of the consultants, but obviously
you have to approve that.
Right, whatever whatever gets funded or moves forward on of those recommendations from a plan would be council and the administration. So if you want to learn more, South Rink, May 27th at 5 to 7. And with that, I will yield back to the council president to wrap it up.
And thank you, all the chairs for coming so prepared, and all our guests that are here. So council member updates and events. Yes.
One quick update. Councilman DeWitt Foy and I met with the mayor and communications director Jessica Shantz about the community engagement task force, which I had brought to our workshop and we put on the priority list. I'm pleased to share that the communications department has a lot of really exciting, interesting, and new engagement ideas that they are working to put towards. So we decided that it's a little premature to like jump right into a task force. We want to give the administration time to get the full effect of what they are hoping to do this year. So I just wanted to update everyone. We're going to put it on the back burner. A little less work to do. We can focus on some of the other stuff, but I'm really excited with what's to come. And we talked about Director Shantz at some point updating council when she's got a little bit more.
Yeah, I knew she was working on
Yeah.
this initiative.
And it dovetails pretty nicely with some of the ideas that were in there.
I do have something, but does anybody have any events they want to share with?
Sure, I'd be glad to. First, the Cedar Lee Special Improvement District meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 11 a.m.
Oh, right.
At the Lee Road Library, Room A. This Thursday, the city is having its end of watch ceremony to honor our fallen police officers. We did not have that event last year. That's at 7 p.m.
At where?
That's going to be out front of City Hall.
Okay.
But I know it was announced. I just think we need to, is that still on? Do we know?
Yes.
Okay.
I saw it on social.
And then related to that is the Jason West Memorial Fundraiser is this Sunday at Boss Dog from 5 to 8 p.m. That's always a great event, raises a lot of money. That's 5 to 8 at Boss Dog. They have a raffle and baskets with lots of great things. I know I'll be there. And
Just
then,
the prospect.
And then lastly, We Are Noble is this weekend. And if you go to their website, they have their list of activities. It starts Friday and runs through Sunday.
And then a week from Friday, the Noble Road Noble Fest on
May 22nd.
20, yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's a week from Friday.
22nd.
Yeah.
Yes, I think it's 6 to 8 maybe.
Yeah, it might be a little earlier.
Maybe
but
5 to 8.
Yeah. I actually don't know. Any other events? Mary, you think of anything?
The Tiger 5K,
Oh, yeah.
I think is this weekend as well.
On the 16th, yeah, Saturday morning.
Saturday?
Saturday morning.
Okay.
Begins at 9 a.m.
Running.
I'll be there. I'll be there. I'll be walking.
I'll be handing you water.
And I can't think of any other events. Oh, I was thinking about inviting, I should have asked Tom Hotchkiss Lilly when he was here, maybe to the meeting on June 1st, inviting the organizers of the 100-year Heights High celebration, just to, kind of advertise, what they're doing.
It's the Heights Schools Foundation.
Yeah. So I took the liberty of texting Addie and seeing if she could round them up. So I just want to know, did everybody get a chance to look at that handout about the council engaging, public? I think I kind of put out like handed you guys under new business at the last meeting.
Well, when I looked at it, but when are we talking about it?
Well, what I was hoping was really, I don't want to make this a year-long thing. This is something we should really be doing quickly. There's, I basically came up with a rationale that we should, as part of our informal duties to meet with the public, have a mechanism to do that. And Craig Cobb brought up that, maybe we do this, kind of like as a meet your council person, kind of like a meet the police thing. I don't think we have to do everything at the community center, but I do think we should do it in a way that is kind of, in a sense, I guess, formalized, like the meet your council people. I think it would be good. I think it would be good if we did this, in pairs or, that kind of thing, just because, you're not going to, I don't know if people want to come out 7 times to, meet individual people. It kind of thins things down a little bit. But that's up to, that will be up to you you individually if you wanted to do it that way.
I just had a question about number 3 to understand it. If you have an
Could you
issue,
read it to me?
it said no topic covering anything before a committee that 2 or more council persons are members of should be discussed in any way that could be considered deliberation regarding planning or possible legislation. Does this mean if you had, say, the head of housing building, for example, and someone not on that committee, you could talk about that issue? Okay, I wasn't sure if this is just a prohibition against talking about issues or council, or if it was just the numbers. Yeah, got
Just
it.
anything that would be a possible violation.
I really liked Councilman Cobb's recommendation that went to this. I mean, my only ask would be that we have, if we're using council resources, that we have some sort of like a common branding, like it is like a meet your council like program. I just think that will go a long way in kind of just reducing confusion
Or
about
issues
who-
and answers or
Was the
something,
first
not so
thing I
much
said.
about
It was like,
us, and
yes,
more about
let's
the
do that.
issues.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I am sitting on it.
Oh.
So can we put this on the agenda?
Sure. For
It
Monday?
just caught me off guard.
Yeah, okay. I mean, just, I really
I'm
just,
sorry.
I just don't wanna make this like a lifelong thing.
I
That's all.
know.
No, Monday would be fine. I'll write that down. All right, so anything else under, let's talk about anything other. We have an other, because what I'm gonna need to do is adjourn this meeting, and then we'll do our little special regular meeting, which should be very short.
Anyone open discussion about this piece of legislation?
Yes, yeah, we should do that, but I meant, was there anything other than this legislation that anybody wanted to point out? Okay, then let's talk about, can you read this? I don't have it in front of me.
Are we now in the
099.
special council?
No,
Oh,
we're
sorry.
still in committee of the whole.
Okay.
But if, how we discuss legislative review, that's, I guess, what we're doing now.
Ordinance number 099-2026, an ordinance consenting to the mayor's designation of an existing board, commission, or committee of the city to serve as the city's housing advisory board, and the appointment of additional members, if necessary, in accordance with Ohio Revised Code, Chapter 176, and declaring the necessity of this legislation become immediately effective as emergency measure.
So either mayor or assistant director Helsel, do you wanna talk about this at all, or just the purpose and so forth?
Sure. Well, for
Come on, or if you don't mind.
For a number of years now, the Home Resources Repair Center, HRRC, has been conducting various needs-oriented home improvement programs and down payment assistance programs for the city of Cleveland Heights. And up until right about now, they've all been federally funded through federal grant dollars, whether through the Home Investment Partnership, CDBG, or other ARPA, yes. Those were all conducted in accordance with the Home Investment Partnership guidelines. But yes, absolutely. And so with the council's sort of reappropriation of revenue replacement dollars to pay for that were then eligible, city eligible salaries, to free up general funds that could be used to continue ARPA programs past the 2026 expenditure deadlines. City Council authorized an additional $600,000 for the down payment assistance program through HRRC. The only problem is that state law requires that when you use tax dollars to finance a housing program such as down payment assistance, you need to first establish a housing advisory board. And then the administration submits its comprehensive plan and proposals to the housing advisory board for review, comment, and recommendation to city council, which then has to adopt the plan. And there's a timeline by which all that takes place. And so the purpose of this legislation is to allow the mayor to, let me step back for a second. There are 3 ways that you can create a housing advisory board. You can create one out of whole cloth and then appoint new members, or you can
contract with an adjoining or overlapping political subdivision and become part of their housing advisory board. Or a city can do, like what Shaker Heights did in 2016, I believe. You can appoint a pre-existing city body, board, commission, committee to serve as the housing advisory board. And that's what is being proposed with this legislation here. It's just the fastest way to go about doing it. And by using the CRA Housing Council, we're already tapping into a body that has a lot of the pre-existing expertise and subject matter knowledge that you want and need to have in a housing advisory board.
So we would use them then for following this ORC? We could use a CRA board?
Precisely. There are certain representation requirements that have to be met on the Housing Advisory Board under Ohio law. But Ohio law does basically contemplate this and says that when you designate a board, the mayor of the municipal corporation may appoint additional members that serve only in an advisory capacity and are not considered members of the original board. So if we need to appoint additional members to meet the representation requirements under Ohio law, those additional members won't be considered part of the CRA Housing Council. They'll only be part of the Housing Advisory Board.
I'm very glad to see this moving so quickly. I think this is a question for Director Zanft. We had a number of residents, 2 of which I heard from, that have been in the queue for the down payment assistance funds that have now been somewhat interrupted by needing to do all the procedural pieces. So what's the timeline for getting the program back running? And are those people that have been caught in the middle, are they going to be able to take advantage of the down payment assistance program?
Yeah, this is the integral step in that entire process. And as Assistant Law Director stated, there's a timeline which we think gets to about June 15th should we hit all the deadlines. And that would then allow those sort of people caught in between to take advantage of it starting thereafter. So that's the goal, is to do this as soon as we possibly can.
Thank you.
Any questions? Okay. In that case, I guess what we'll do is adjourn the meeting and go over, and we have to go to the other, can we vote in here?
It depends where the meeting was noticed for.
Probably council chambers.
If it was noticed for council chambers, we'll probably do it in council chambers.
I'm gonna adjourn this meeting at 8:02 and we're gonna go over into the council chambers of both.